Rain had fallen softly all morning, a gentle drizzle that turned the ground slick and the sky a deep, leaden gray. From where I stood upon the ramparts of the ancient keep at Winterfell, I could see faint wisps of mist curling along the outer walls, embracing the old stone in a melancholy hush. I rested my palms on the cold parapet and tried to imagine what lay thousands of leagues to the southeast, far beyond the bite and the fingers, beyond even the warm waters of the summer sea, Valyria, seat of the greatest empire in the known world. It was a name scarcely spoken here in the north, and when it was done in hushed, cautious tones as if it might summon a dragon from the heavens. But rumors had reached us, each more troubling than the last. Legions of soldiers that carried steel of shimmering quality, pale as moonlight and deadly sharp. Armies supported by men well versed in fire and blood magic, or so the whispers went. Their dragons were said to blacken the sky and scald the earth as they soared above armies that marched unchallenged across Essos. The scions of old Valyria, the freehold itself, had turned their eyes westward toward Westeros, and the rumors insisted that the north was their next conquest. It seemed absurd at first. Why would an empire so grand and mighty concern itself with the sparse towns and frigid nights of the north? But if the stories were true, the Valyrians had already claimed the southern coasts of Westeros, strongholds taken or coerced into bending the knee. It had taken the Whispers weeks to travel this far, but they arrived like thunder at a lonely hearth. I looked down at my hands, clenched tight upon the stone, knuckles white. My name is Branna Stark, youngest daughter of Lord Torrhen Stark, Warden of the North. I have no formal place in the line of succession, nor do I command soldiers or hold lands. My value to my father's house is found in my counsel, in my cleverness. I have studied histories, pored over ancient scrolls, learned from maesters and wandering scholars. Though the arms and banners belong to my father, it is I who once mapped out the supply routes that carried us through 3 harsh winters. It is I who once led negotiations with the Manderleys of White Harbor to avert a brewing feud. My father, patient, somber, and determined, trusted me in times of difficulty. But was any of that knowledge enough to save the north if Valyria truly came? It was said that even the mighty Rhoynar kingdoms had been vanquished by the freehold. Under the might of its dragons and sorceries, entire cities had crumbled. If Valyria had decided that our unbroken tradition of refusing subjugation made us too proud or too dangerous, how would we endure? These questions churned within me like a dark tide. As I remained there, the drizzle slowed and the sky lightened to a pallid white. Footsteps behind me drew my attention. I turned to see my elder brother, Edric, approach, clad in a thick fur cloak. The wind ruffled the pelt around his shoulders. His hair, the same dark brown as mine, was damp with rain, droplets clinging to the ends. He had that wary look about him, like a hound that senses some predator in the distance. He didn't speak at first, merely letting his gaze roam over Winterfell's courtyard, training men drilling with blunted spears, stable hands hauling straw, the ring of sword against shield echoing. Then he exhaled a weary sigh. "Father wants us in the great hall," he said. "We've had ravens from the south." He didn't need to say more, because there was only one matter that weighed so heavily. I nodded and followed him across the ramparts, down the spiraling stone steps into the passageways that led to the great hall. Inside, the warmth of burning hearths wrapped around us, but even the fires felt meager compared to the cold that lingered from the news. The hall was quiet except for a few hushed conversations. Several northern lords had arrived in haste. I recognized the Manderley sigil on one man's cloak, the Karstark sunburst on another, and to the far side I spotted Galbart Glover, who was speaking in earnest tones with a tall, bearded man from House Serwyn. Near the high table stood my father, Lord Torrhen Stark. His face looked graver than I had ever seen it, more lined at the corners of his eyes. Maester Halleys was at his side, a letter in his hand. Lord Torrhen lifted a hand and beckoned us. My father was not a man who gave speeches easily. He was quiet, mild in manner, but unyielding when he set his mind to something. So when I saw the strain in his posture, I knew ill news had come. "We have ravens from the south," he said without preamble. Edric and I exchanged glances. King Argilac Durrandon of the Stormlands has been forced to cede land along the coast to envoys of Valyria. There was a battle. The Stormlander navy was all but broken by dragonfire at sea. And there is more. A hush fell over us. I felt as though the air had thickened into an invisible swirl of dread. "Valyrian forces have landed near the Blackwater," my father continued, his voice deceptively even. "Some say they will soon advance on the Crownlands. Others claim they have an alliance with House Lannister, though that is rumor. However, what matters for us is the last part. The letter states that the Valyrian envoys are demanding fealty from every great house in Westeros. They demand roads be built for their armies. They demand we supply them with metals for their forges, iron and steel for their expansions. And they demand hostages. A flash of heat flooded my cheeks. Hostages from the great houses. The meaning was clear. They wanted the children of lords as guarantees of loyalty to hold them in foreign courts under watchful eyes. Edric hissed through his teeth. They dare. I clenched my jaw. It seems the mighty freehold has grown bold, or else they believe no force in Westeros can resist them. Maester Halleys lifted the letter. Their representative invites a response. They offer trade benefits, the protection of their dragons, and claim they only wish to secure a measure of stability in the region. My father's face darkened. Stability, they call it. He fell silent for a moment, seeming to weigh every breath. Then he said, we will not send hostages. Nor will we supply these invaders with the steel of the north. Let them see how the north answers such demands. I knew what he meant, and my blood coursed with a mixture of pride and terror. We had seen the might of Valyria only from afar, heard stories from travelers and old sea captains. But we had never faced dragons, never tested our steel against sorcery. The north would stand firm. But how much blood would be spilled for that stance? In the days that followed, Winterfell became a hive of frantic activity. Blacksmiths worked day and night to forge new swords and spears, while the older weapons were sharpened to deadly edges. Ravens flew back and forth, the Umbers in the last hearth promised men, the Karstarks mustered 4,000 foot and a cavalry company, the Boltons readied themselves in the dread fort. Even the Manderleys of White Harbor, who often found more in common with southern Morays, pledged their full support. The North, in all its icy pride, would stand as one. The letters my father sent to the Valyrians were short, politely worded rejections. I had tried to soften the language, to appeal to reason, but in truth there was no negotiating with dragons. Father's refusal was an act of defiance. We only waited for the consequences. The first sign of the Valyrian reply came when a solitary figure on horseback arrived from the south. Dressed in black and silver, he was a gaunt man with hair the color of ash and eyes like chips of obsidian. He rode a fiery stallion and bore a small banner, 3 dragons breathing flames, the symbol of the freehold. We welcomed him into the great hall cautiously, and there, before my father, the man spoke in a thickly accented common tongue. My lords of the north, I bring word from the ruling archons of the freehold of Valyria. Submit. Lay down your arms. Present your fealty. Or burn. He did not mince words. He offered no illusions of compromise. Valyria had grown used to swift compliance. Arrogance clung to him like cologne, and the quiet in the great hall pressed heavy on my ears. It took all my restraint not to spit a retort. My father only raised an eyebrow. You ride a long way to deliver so brief a message. I come in courtesy, the envoy said with a tilt of his head, to offer a final chance to spare the north. You must see reason. Our legions are endless. Our magic is powerful. Our dragons make war a foregone conclusion. Bend the knee, Lord Stark, or you consign these lands to fire and ruin. Beside my father, Edric stiffened. My father, who had stood like a statue through the threat, finally replied in a calm tone, we appreciate your courtesy. You have my answer already. We bow to no foreign lord, no matter how many dragons they command. The envoy offered a small, sad smile. Then he said, in a voice that chilled my spine, so be it. And with that he turned on his heel and walked out. It was only the next night, during the gray hush of pre-dawn, that the flicker of an orange glow lit the horizon to the south. I was awakened by shouts from the walls, men calling frantically. I dressed, tugging on boots and cloak in haste, and climbed up into the freezing air. Far beyond Winterfell's protective walls, I saw a swirl of reddish light in the sky. It resembled a distant storm, except storms in the north did not burn. Anxious speculation buzzed around me. Dragon fire, yes. A demonstration of power? The men around me looked wary, uncertain. None of us could know the scale of the conflagration. But soon as the ravens arrived from the south, we learned that a small mountain village had been razed. According to survivors, a single dragon soared overhead and bathed the settlement in flame. In the aftermath, the dwellings, the farmland, even the trees had smoldered like a black scar. 500 people gone, either burned or fled. A warning, the letter attached to the raven said. My father drew me aside after reading that note. We have no choice, he said quietly, but to gather all forces. The Valyrians are waging open war. They think to frighten us into submission. I realized then the magnitude of what we faced. The north was vast, but scarcely populated compared to the lush lands of the Reach or the Riverlands. Our advantage had always been distance and the punishing winters that deterred southern ambitions. Yet dragons care nothing for distance or cold. They could fly and their riders would follow. If the Valyrians unleashed their full might, how long could we endure? Still, I saw no fear in my father's eyes, only sorrow that it had come to this. And in his stance I saw a raw determination, the sort that forged legends of our house. I placed a hand on his arm. "We will make them regret flying north," I said. He nodded, the barest ghost of a smile. "I do not relish what must come, but we do what we must. The north stands. We will not kneel." Within a fortnight, the roads around Winterfell teemed with men from all corners of the north. I watched as lines of soldiers arrived each day, proud glovers in mottled green cloaks, grim-faced umbers built like bears, fierce Mormonts from Bear Island, tall and regal Manderley knights with silver tridents upon their banners, black-caped Karstarks with sunburst emblems, the Bolton men with flayed man sigils who spurred uneasy whispers even among allies. The number of gathered men was staggering, yet we all knew that on an open field, against dragons, our swords might be useless. Our only hope was strategy, cunning, and the land itself. At the War Council, many voices raised the same question: where will the Valyrians land their invasion? They would not march through Moat Cailin easily, for that fortress protected the bottleneck approach from the south. In truth, Moat Cailin was the best place to defend the north from a southern invasion, but only if the enemy intended to march on foot. With dragons, they might choose to strike anywhere along our coastline. Or they might attempt to take White Harbor, the only major northern port with deep enough harbor facilities for large ships. The Manderleys insisted they would not surrender their city without a fight. Others urged drawing the Valyrians into the interior, forcing them to contend with harsh northern weather and supply lines. Still, in the back of everyone's mind, the dragons loomed. How many did they command? Had they brought an entire host of them across the sea, or only a handful? No answers were forthcoming, and so father ordered that we fortify White Harbor first. Edric was placed in command there, with a host of thousands to man the walls and harbors. I would stay at Winterfell to manage logistics and the flow of ravens, ensuring that the lines of communication stayed intact no matter what. Word came that the Boltons would move south to Moat Cailin to see if the Valyrians approached by land or by the neck. The Umbers likewise spread to the east. It felt like the entire north prepared to hold its breath. Edric embraced me briefly before he left, his eyes heavy with unspoken worry. He was not a man to fear a sword's edge, but this was something else entirely. And I, too, felt that creeping sense of doom. I recall the day weeks later when the Raven arrived from White Harbor. It bore a simple message: the dragon riders had been spotted off the coast, their silhouettes like winged shadows against the setting sun. My heart pounded so fiercely in my chest that I had to steady myself on a nearby table. I reread the words: at least 3 dragons. And behind them, countless ships. When the storm came, it came all at once. White Harbor burned. Later we would learn that Valyria had unleashed not 3 dragons, but 5. 5 monstrous beasts of legend, their wings blotting out the sky, their flames transforming the city's wharfs into infernos. Edric, with the men stationed there, had done all they could. The harbor catapults launched flaming tar, archers loosed volleys of arrows tipped in black iron, but the dragons seemed unstoppable. They fell upon the ships blockading the mouth of the harbor, turning the sea to a cauldron of smoke and steam. The wind carried the stench of scorched wood and flesh to the city walls. From his vantage in the harbor tower, Edric saw the main Valyrian legion land in smaller galleys just north of the city. Thousands of them, wearing armor that gleamed like polished silver, marched in disciplined ranks. They moved with precision as though they had conquered 100 lands and found no reason to fear one more. As Edric's men rained arrows down upon them, the dragons circled overhead, answering with torrents of flame that shattered the gates and forced defenders to retreat. The Manderley knights rode out, valiantly clashing steel with the invaders. But the foe carried strange weapons, some forged of that pale, near unbreakable metal rumored to be an offshoot of Valyrian steel. I'd heard it could cut through mail like wool. And behind them loomed sorcerers with eyes the color of molten gold, chanting words in High Valyrian that seemed to sear the air with hidden power. Even so, White Harbor did not fall in a day. The city's walls were strong, and the defenders were fierce. For 3 days they fought, street by street. Fires gutted entire neighborhoods, sending smoke billowing into the sky. Women and children took refuge in cellars or fled into the countryside. My brother led a sortie that managed to kill 2 of the Valyrian sorcerers. For that, they paid dearly when one of the dragons, a huge black beast named Moryx, set the city's eastern quarter aflame. The wails of the dying mingled with the roars of dragons and the thunder of collapsing structures. By the 4th day, it was clear the city was lost. Edric, wounded by a slash across his ribs, organized a retreat. Thousands who could still fight or walk fled White Harbor for the safety of Winterfell's interior lands. The Manderley Keep itself was scorched and overrun. In the end, the banners of the freehold flew above White Harbor's ramparts. When we learned the city had fallen, Winterfell descended into a grim hush. My father remained stonily calm, though I saw tears glisten in his eyes when Maester Halleys recounted the final dispatch. White Harbor, our greatest city, the seat of our trade, in enemy hands. The Valyrians had come in force, proving they could conquer even behind high walls. Yet Edric was alive, and that lit a small spark within me. He escaped with a band of survivors, heading west across the wintry hills to regroup. My father announced that we would not yield, that White Harbor's fall, dreadful as it was, did not break the North's spirit. He sent word to the Umbers and the Karstarks, instructing them to harry the roads and hamper the Valyrians' ability to move deeper inland. Meanwhile, we prepared at Winterfell for the possibility of a direct assault. If the dragons came here, we could only do what we had always done. Fight with tooth and claw, with cunning and every advantage the land might grant. Many nights I struggled to sleep, imagining how it must have been to see dragons overhead, the sky lit with unnatural fire. I recalled the stories from ancient days, how a band of free folk once claimed to have slain a dragon in the shadow of the Frostfangs. But the truth of that tale was unknown, and we had no illusions that killing a full-grown Valyrian dragon was easily done. We had scorpions, large crossbows, even ballistae that we'd hastily constructed from old catapult frames, but no one could say if they would be enough. Amid all this preparation, the nature of my role changed. Father needed counsel, yes, but he also needed me to handle the labyrinth of supply lines. The North was huge, and with winter always threatening in the distance, ensuring enough food for an army was a challenge even without foreign invaders. I spent my days poring over inventories, conferring with Maester Halleys, sending riders to gather grain from as far away as the rills and the bar rollins. I had no illusions. If the war lasted long, famine could become our worst enemy. One afternoon, a breathless courier arrived with a message. A Valyrian legion had been sighted marching west from White Harbor, perhaps headed for the King's Road. Another legion advanced along the coast, presumably aiming to subjugate the fishing villages and smaller ports. But the primary threat, so it seemed, was the dragons themselves, who flew in wide circles across the sky, scouting, sowing terror. The stories told by refugees painted a harrowing picture: Valyrian outriders with unnatural, glassy eyes that glowed faintly in the night. Some claimed these were men twisted by foul sorcery. Others insisted they were illusions or conjurations of the Valyrian mages. Whatever the truth, the rumor alone was enough to set hearts hammering. We soon learned that Edric had managed to rally a force near the White Knife, combining his battered survivors with Karstark and Serwyn reinforcements. They harassed the Valyrian supply wagons, lighting them aflame in midnight raids, disappearing before the dragons could retaliate. For a few weeks, the war took on the shape of a cat-and-mouse game, with small skirmishes, each side testing the other. Many villages burned, Valyrian outriders left crucified by vengeful Northmen. There was brutality and terror, but no decisive battle. However, the conquerors grew impatient, it seemed. An empire that spanned continents had no wish to slog through a slow conflict in these cold lands. When summer turned to early autumn, we received word that the High Magus of Valyria himself had arrived at White Harbor, a man named Arnis. With him came 2 more dragons. The scale of this was unprecedented. 7 dragons in total. Perhaps their entire empire had not come, but enough of it had. Enough to break kingdoms, to shatter cities. My father gathered the war council again. Within the flickering torchlight of Winterfell's great hall, he looked at his bannermen. They are concentrating their forces at White Harbor. That means one of 2 things: either they plan to fortify their hold on that city and make it their base for raids deeper into the north, or they will advance in a large-scale march, aiming to take Winterfell. Lord Glover's voice emerged from the circle: "Let them come. They will find only death on our roads. Our men know every hill, every forest, every hidden pass. Their dragons cannot be everywhere at once." But another lord countered, "And yet their dragons need only be one place at a time to burn our forces. Open battle will be carnage." My father turned to me. "Branna, your thoughts?" All eyes settled on me. I swallowed and chose my words carefully. The Valyrians thrive on overwhelming force. We cannot match them in a direct confrontation. Our advantage is the North's size and harshness. If we can keep them chasing us, forcing them to split their forces, we might negate their greatest asset, the dragons. Dragons tire if forced to fly long stretches day after day. Their riders will have to be strategic, and that might give us openings. But in the end, we must strike a decisive blow or they will wear us down. Lord Serwyn rubbed his jaw. Decisive blow, how? Do you have some secret knowledge to slay dragons? I felt my mouth go dry. There are old stories. Some claim large scorpions or ballista bolts can wound a dragon's wing. Some claim a well-placed spear can pierce the underbelly. None of these are guaranteed. Dragons are cunning beasts, not mindless. But we do know they can be killed. The real question is how to survive the mages and the foot soldiers who will follow in the dragon's wake. It was a grim truth. Still, no one flinched from it. The North had chosen defiance, and there would be no turning back now. So Father declared that we would attempt to draw the Valyrians inland, away from the support of their fleet. We would fortify Moat Cailin with a small force to stymie any southern approach or any attempt to circle around the neck. Meanwhile, the bulk of our forces would wait in hidden camps along the King's Road, prepared for a mobile defense. Winterfell's walls would not be left empty. 2,000 men would hold it if the Valyrians came at us directly. But we planned to lure them into the rougher terrain, to harass them relentlessly, and then, if an opportunity arose to slay a dragon or two, we would seize it. If we could kill or wound enough dragons, the Valyrians might realize the North wasn't worth the cost. We were not ignorant of how dangerous that plan was. The chance of success was slim, but it was all we had. That night, as I walked the inner courtyard of Winterfell alone, I felt a trembling in my limbs. I pressed a hand to my chest, leaning against the trunk of the old weirwood that grew there. Was this how it would end, the storied line of Starks? With Dragonfire raining upon us, a proud but broken house? I closed my eyes and prayed to the old gods for strength, or mercy, or both. Days passed. A biting chill permeated the air, though winter was not fully upon us yet. The crispness of autumn tinted leaves red and gold. We had word that the Valyrian Legion had begun its march from White Harbor, thousands strong, with at least 4 dragons circling overhead. The other 3 dragons, commanded by the High Magus Aranis, had not yet moved from the city, presumably in reserve. Scouts relayed that the Legion traveled with supply wagons, siege weaponry of bizarre design, machines that used alchemical fire. Under my father's orders, the northern armies pulled back from direct confrontation, letting the invaders come. They left behind only scorched earth in some places, ensuring the Valyrians found no easy shelter or provisions. The weather, though not yet wintry, was colder than Valyria's men might be used to. Rain turned roads into muddy slugs. Nightfall brought biting winds. But still, they advanced, unstoppable as a tide. Eventually, the first real battle of this campaign occurred near a place called the Twisted Oaks, a small forest several leagues west of the King's Road. Edric led a vanguard of Karstark swordsmen and Manderley knights who ambushed the Valyrian forward scouts at dawn. By the time horns sounded, Edric had cut down dozens. But then the roar came from the sky and the ground turned molten with dragon flame. Our men scattered, some diving into shallow streams or behind rocky outcrops. A second wave of Northmen rushed in from the flank, but the Valyrian Legion formed a disciplined shield wall, their spears bristling, their archers unleashing volleys of black-shafted arrows. That day, the Karstarks and Manderleys fought with valor, but they were forced to retreat. We lost nearly 500 men, the Valyrians perhaps 200. But in that clash, we gained something invaluable. We managed to wound one of their dragons. A scorpion bolt from a hidden ballista found its mark in a dragon's wing. The beast shrieked in rage and reeled away, trailing a spatter of black-red blood. That gave the Northmen hope. The improbable had been done. Still, the cost was great, and the Legion pressed on, unstoppable. They burned villages, farmland, even the holdfast of a minor lord who refused to yield. Refugees flooded north, arriving at Winterfell's gates with haunting stories of men set aflame in their own homes. The cruelty seemed to escalate with each passing day as the conquerors recognized how stubbornly the North resisted. My father refused to cower behind Winterfell's walls. He led a force personally out onto the fields near the Saltspear, hoping to draw the Legion into more contested ground. I stayed behind, for that was my role, but my heart pounded with dread every moment. I waited anxiously for ravens to bring word of the fighting. The first letter said that Father's maneuvers forced a partial retreat of the Valyrian cavalry after an early morning skirmish. The second letter, penned by one of the Manderley knights, described the harrowing sight of a dragon descending upon them, its roar louder than thunder. My father had nearly been roasted alive if not for the quick thinking of a dozen archers who sent a volley into the dragon's flank, distracting it. Even so, many were burned. Bodies were found charred to ash, unrecognizable. Then came worse news. The High Magus Aranis was moving out of White Harbor with the remaining 3 dragons. That meant they intended to converge to bring the combined might of 7 dragons upon us. If that happened, no place in the north might stand. Father sent urgent word, prepare Winterfell for siege. Fortify it beyond measure. If we cannot hold them in open country, we may need to weather a direct assault. Pray the old gods we can. So we gathered every last resource and soul within the walls. Women and children, old folk from surrounding villages, farmers and tradesmen all crowded inside. We stored every grain we could gather, slaughtered the livestock that could not be fed. The yard rang day and night with the hammering of blacksmiths forging arrowheads. We reinforced the walls, constructed more scorpions, and assigned the best archers to man them. We readied barrels of pitch and oil to hurl onto any who tried to storm the gate. In the midst of this chaos, I found moments to stand by the weirwood tree in the godwood. My breath frosted in the air. I knelt and placed a hand on the tree's white bark. It was said that the old gods watched through these carved faces. I prayed to them for deliverance, for courage for our people, for strength for my father and brother. That was when Edric returned. He arrived late in the evening, trudging through the open gate with maybe 300 men in ragged formation behind him. They looked exhausted, bloodied, battered. Edric himself had a fresh burn on his left forearm and his eyes were hollow with grief. I hurried to him, ignoring the mud that spattered my skirts, and embraced him. He exhaled shakily. They're close, Branna, he whispered. They're no more than a week's march. If father can't hold them off. He didn't finish. Instead, he allowed the maesters to lead him off for treatment. I felt tears gathering in my eyes as I took in the sight of so many wounded, men with crude bandages, limping, some carried on stretchers, their moans soft but unrelenting. The war was ravaging us. Valyria's punishments were slow and merciless, as though they took pleasure in making an example of the north. Over the next days, raven after raven flew out and back. Reports of father's force clashing with the Valyrian vanguard reached us, battles fought on the banks of rivers in narrow passes. We learned he had led a brilliant ambush at a place called Raven's Ford, drowning many in the swirling currents, but it was still not enough to stop their advance. Each engagement cost the Valyrians men, and with each engagement, father and his bannermen withdrew further north. The legion moved steadily on, pushing father's force toward Winterfell. Meanwhile, the High Magus with his 3 dragons approached from the east, possibly to encircle us. At last, father's scouts spotted them, the entire Valyrian might united, a host of thousands with siege engines and dragons overhead. They were just a few days away from Winterfell, and father had retreated within our walls. When he rode through the gates, grime and blood crusted on his armor, I hardly recognized him. Yet his posture was unbroken, his eyes fierce despite weariness. The moment he dismounted, he summoned a final war council. In the great hall, which was cleared of all but essential members, father spoke in a low, measured tone, "They will be upon us soon. We must prepare for a siege, but we know a siege with dragons is unlike any other. They can fly over walls, they can burn towers, they can turn stone to ruin if we cannot drive them off. That means we must face them directly. We must kill or drive away their dragons." He paused, letting the weight of that statement sink in. Then he looked at me. "Branna, tell them what you've discovered." I inhaled. For weeks, I had scoured old manuscripts and scrolls, searching for anything, any clue, any advantage. A half-forgotten text from a maester named Kennet described an early battle in Essos where a catapult loaded with raw, untempered iron shards inflicted wounds on a dragon. The impurities in the iron supposedly caused the creature immense pain. It was uncertain, possibly myth. But we were desperate. Clearing my throat, I said, "We've prepared canisters of dragoglass, obsidian, mixed with shards of raw iron. We plan to catapult them at the dragons. We've also coated some scorpion bolts in a mixture of oils said to irritate wounds. It may be folly, but it might also be the only chance. We must coordinate volley after volley, aim to cripple wings or injure the beasts. If even one dragon goes down in flames, it could break their morale, or at least show them the cost of continuing." A hush. Lord Glover nodded grimly. Edric said, "It's worth a try. But what about the Valyrian Legion itself? They'll pound at our gates or scale the walls." My father's voice was quiet. "We will repel them. Our walls are strong. But the key is neutralizing the dragons. If we fail, then Winterfell will burn." We parted ways, each with our orders. That night, as I walked the ramparts, I saw lights flickering in the distance. Torches from the Valyrian encampment, no doubt. They had arrived. The final reckoning was at hand. The first assault came at dawn. The horns sounded, men scrambled. I ran to the battlements, heart thrumming like a war drum. Thick clouds clung to the sky, and in that low, gray light I saw the silhouettes of dragons circling overhead, wings outspread, their roars echoing across the plain. Below, the glint of steel, ranks of the Valyrian legion, moving in perfect formation, carrying tall shields and scaling ladders. Siege towers rolled forward, monstrous contraptions built with foreign knowledge. A hush seemed to envelop the air, a stillness before the storm. Then the dragon's dove. Flames gushed out, igniting the dry grass around Winterfell's walls. The men on the battlements responded with scorpion bolts. Some soared wide, some struck scales and bounced off. But one lucky shot scratched a red dragon's flank and the beast screamed, twisting in the sky. We catapulted canisters of obsidian and iron shards, but the swirling wind carried many astray. Even so, a black dragon shrieked and wobbled, black blood dripping from a wound in its shoulder. Hope flared in my chest. We could hurt them. Below, the legion advanced, rams pounding at the outer gate. Archers from the walls rained arrows upon them, and the defenders poured boiling pitch over the ramparts. The Valyrian soldiers, disciplined and unafraid, pressed on. Some carried strange devices that launched bursts of greenish flame at the walls, alchemical concoctions that clung to stone and burned fiercely. Winterfell's ancient stones smoked and cracked in places. The air was thick with screams, the stench of burning flesh, the thunder of war. I raced along the battlements, directing archers to concentrate fire on whichever dragon swooped closest. Twice I saw dragons unleash their fury upon the courtyard, scorching a group of defenders. Stone exploded in fragments. One tower collapsed, burying men in rubble. I felt an acrid taste in my mouth as I shouted orders, trying to keep the men steady. And through it all, the Valyrian legion battered at the gates until with a deafening crash, the outer gates buckled. Their soldiers surged into the outer ward, where Father and Edric led a desperate defense. Swords clashed, men cried out, the swirl of steel and gore merging into chaos. I glimpsed Father's cloak, battered and stained, his sword arm rising and falling. Edric fought beside him, rallying our men to hold the line. Above us, 2 dragons landed on the walls, raking men with talons. One scorpion crew managed to fire at point-blank range, skewering the underside of a bronze-scaled beast. The dragon roared and spat flame blindly, incinerating defenders but also lighting itself ablaze. In a horrifying spectacle, the creature thrashed and took flight, but its wing was too damaged. It plummeted from the sky, smashing into the far side of the courtyard. My heart leaped. We had felled one. Yet the others remained. I saw a monstrous black dragon with horns like scythes land atop a tower. Astride it was a robed figure, surely one of the Valyrian mages. He lifted his hands and uttered words that reverberated in the air. A wave of searing heat swept across the battlements, forcing men to collapse, gasping. The mage chanted again, and a swirl of eerie, shimmering light appeared around him. It was as if reality bent to his will. Gritting my teeth, I notched an arrow, aimed at the mage's unarmored form, and loosed. The arrow soared true and shattered against an invisible barrier mere feet from him. He turned his head toward me, and I felt a chill as though his black gaze pinned me in place. Then, with a dismissive gesture, he urged the dragon to fling itself into the courtyard. All around, men screamed as the black dragon unleashed scorching flame. I saw Father and Edric crouching behind collapsed masonry, barely avoiding the deadly burst. The black dragon swung its tail, sending men flying. But at that moment, from the rubble of a fallen tower, a scorpion's jagged bolt fired. It struck the dragon in the chest, punching through a thin gap in its scaled armor. The beast howled, thrashing in agony. The mage on its back struggled to maintain control, his arms wheeling. Another volley of crossbow bolts came from the side, peppering the dragon's neck and flank. In a desperate fury, the creature spat more flame, but the damage was done. It collapsed with a shuddering groan, blood pooling. The mage tried to leap clear, but Father was there, sword in hand. With a savage thrust, he skewered the robed figure through the chest. Even from afar, I saw the bright gush of blood. A second dragon down. My heart soared only to plunge as a new roar tore across the sky. One of the largest dragons we had seen, a monstrous gold-scaled beast, descended upon the courtyard, its wings fanning a whirlwind of dust and ash. On its back sat another mage, robed in crimson, with a staff topped by a dragon's skull cast in iron. This had to be the High Magus Arnis. The gold dragon inhaled, and Father and Edric dove for cover, but they could not escape the torrent of flame that engulfed the courtyard. Soldiers, my father's men, vanished in an inferno. I screamed, certain that Father was gone. For a moment, the world narrowed to that single blaze of horror. Then, through the thick smoke, I spotted movement. Father and Edric had ducked behind a slab of broken stone, though the edges of their cloaks were aflame. They tore the burning cloth away, emerging scorched and wounded, but alive. Arnie circled overhead, chanting in an eerie voice. Shimmering glyphs of light traced patterns in the air. The temperature spiked, and the stone beneath my feet felt scalding even through my boots. This was no ordinary foe. This was the apex of Valyrian power, a man who had spent his life bending fire and magic to his will. And he had chosen to break Winterfell personally. The siege raged on. The gate to the second ward began to crack under repeated rams. The defenders were fewer now, many burned, some trapped beneath rubble. The dragons that still lived soared overhead, launching bursts of fire at intervals, terrorizing the walls. One by one, the scorpions fell silent as their crews were incinerated. My own vantage on the battlements became precarious. A swirl of sparks and cinders filled the air. Then I saw Edric wave his sword, rallying men for a final stand around Father. They had formed a shield wall near the keep's entrance. The High Magus landed his dragon, stepping onto the charred flagstones, and Father's small group braced themselves. My mind raced. If Arnis unleashed another wave of that conjured fire, all would be lost. I sprinted along the wall, searching for a vantage where one of our final scorpions might still stand. Near the collapsed tower, I found the weapon loaded with a single bolt coated in that mixture of raw iron and oil. Its crew lay dead. Gritting my teeth, I steadied the mechanism. I was no expert, but I had practiced enough to know the basics. My hands trembled as I aimed at the gold dragon below, trying to gauge the distance and angle. In the courtyard, Father called out Valyrian. You face Torrent Stark, Lord of Winterfell. Stand down and we will give you mercy. Arnie's cold laughter echoed. Mercy? From a doomed people? I shall claim your head and your sons and mount them on my banner. Your name will be Ash, your line ended. The gold dragon roared, baring fangs. Father lifted his sword. I took a steadying breath. This was my one shot. If I missed or if Arnis glimpsed it in time to conjure some sorcery, all was lost. I tried to align the scorpion's sights on the dragon's flank, an area under the wing where the scales might be thinner. The courtyard glowed with heat haze, making it hard to see. I exhaled slowly, remembering a lesson from a kindly old archer who once taught me. Breathe out. Count your heartbeats. Release. The bolt flew, whistling through the smoke-choked air. I watched, transfixed, as it seemed to sail wide. No, it arced downward. At the last moment, the dragon shifted, lifting a wing, exposing the vulnerable joint. The bolt struck with a wet crunch. A hideous shriek filled the courtyard. The dragon snapped its head around, thrashing. Men scattered. The High Magus stumbled, nearly toppling from the saddle. Seizing that instant, Father and Edric surged forward. They led the battered defenders in a desperate charge. Spears jabbed at the wounded dragon's belly, swords hacked at its flailing limbs. The beast exhaled flame in short bursts, but in its panic it could not concentrate its fury. Arnis managed to throw a wall of shimmering air between Father's sword and himself, but Edric circled behind, slamming his shield into the mage's side. The man snarled, turning to conjure a blast of flame that scorched Edric's shield to cinders. Edric cried out, dropping the smoldering wood. The mage lifted his staff, a word of killing magic on his lips. But Father was there, seizing the moment. He thrust his sword through Arnie's chest, a savage, brutal motion. The mage's eyes bulged, black blood spattering. With a final, ragged breath, the High Magus collapsed, tumbling from the dragon's back. His staff clattered to the stones. The gold dragon shrieked one last time, keening in heartbreak or fury at the fall of its master. As Father and the others drove their spears deeper, it collapsed, wings twitching weakly. Then it lay still. Stunned silence reigned. We had slain the greatest of the dragons, and with him, the High Magus. The watchers on the battlements let out a ragged cheer. Another dragon soared overhead, uncertain, and it turned, flapping away, perhaps retreating. But the legion remained. With the death of their leaders, confusion rippled through the Valyrian ranks, but they did not flee at once. They continued their assault, though with less coordination, and the dragons that remained struggled to obey new riders or flew in disarray. Father, Edric, and the defenders pressed the advantage. We flung open a sally port near the collapsed tower, letting our cavalry, what remained of it, surge out and flank the Valyrian soldiers from behind. The day's battle stretched into a desperate melee. By dusk, the courtyard was awash with blood, the walls blackened by soot. Another dragon was downed by a scorpion bolt. Two more soared away, battered. The legion's lines collapsed, scattered across fields littered with corpses. Some tried to regroup near their siege towers, only to be encircled and cut down. Others surrendered. Father took them as prisoners, but we had little resource to spare for captive care. Many died of wounds or exposure in the harsh northern night. By the following morning, the Valyrian banners had fallen silent around Winterfell. The survivors were in full retreat, stumbling south or east, no doubt seeking to rejoin any other Valyrian forces. But we knew that with the High Magus and the mightiest dragon slain, the backbone of the invasion was cracked. Even dragons must fear the scorpions that had proven their lethal potential. Even the Legion must fear the unbending will of the North. Still, our own losses were staggering. Thousands of Northmen had perished. Winterfell itself lay in partial ruin with entire sections burned or collapsed. Outside the walls, villages had been decimated, farmland scorched. Those who survived war-haunted expressions, still unable to believe we had faced dragonfire and lived. I helped tend to the wounded in makeshift infirmaries. The screams and the smell of burnt flesh were things I would never forget. Edric's burn on his arm had worsened. Infection set in, and Maester Hally's worked tirelessly to clean and bandage it. Father had a broken rib and severe bruising, along with cuts that needed stitching. Scores of men lost limbs or eyes. I moved from cot to cot, offering what comfort I could. The war might have turned in our favor, but the cost was beyond measure. In the days that followed, riders scouted to confirm the state of the Valyrian forces. They reported that the remaining dragons had retreated beyond the coast. At White Harbor, a smaller contingent of freehold soldiers held the city, but with their principal leadership gone, they were in disarray. Many of them boarded ships and sailed away, presumably returning to Essos. Others tried to hold onto their conquest, but the men of the north, emboldened by news of Winterfell's victory, rallied. House Manderly, furious at the sack of their beloved city, led a campaign to reclaim White Harbor. Edric, battered as he was, insisted on going with them once he could stand. He promised me that this time the north would not rest until the foreign invaders were driven out entirely. And so an unlikely dawn came to the north. Where once we had only known terror and rumors of unstoppable conquest, we now had glimpses of hope. We had learned that dragons were not invincible, that the cunning and resilience of the North could fell even the greatest power in the known world. Father, though battered, walked the walls of Winterfell each day, overseeing repairs, greeting the men with a solemn nod. He would pause sometimes at the still smoldering carcass of the gold dragon in the courtyard, a rotting reminder of the high price of victory but also a testament to our defiance. Weeks passed before we had definitive word of the Valyrian withdrawal. The ships were mostly gone from White Harbor, and the few dragons that remained had flown eastward, their riders presumably deciding that Westeros was not worth the risk. We heard rumor that infighting had broken out within the Valyrian ranks, as lesser mages and generals vied for power in the wake of Arryn's death. Perhaps that was the final blow to their campaign, an empire too vast, fracturing from within. However it came about, the Legion's hold on the North was broken. And with them gone, the North remained unbowed, unbent, unbroken, though that last phrase truly belonged to Dorne. For us, the words were more dire. Winter is coming. We had survived the dragons, but there would be scars that might never heal. In time, we gleaned the scope of what had happened. The freehold of Valyria, in its hubris, had attempted to conquer Westeros in its entirety. They had begun with the Stormlands, parts of the Reach, and the Crownlands, subjugating or cowing local lords. But the North, too vast, too determined, had exacted a cost none of them foresaw. Some whispered that our success was as much luck as valor, that if more dragons had come, or if the High Magus had lived to complete his spells, we would have been reduced to ashes. Others believed the old gods had protected us, that the weirwood trees themselves had lent power to our defense. I did not pretend to know the truth. I only knew what we had endured, and that we still stood. Father summoned the remaining northern lords to a gathering at Winterfell, even as it stood partially ruined, half its towers blackened. They came Karstarks, Glovers, Serwins, Manderlys, Umbers, Mormonts, Boltons, and all the rest. Many bore their own wounds and heavy losses, yet their heads were high. In the great hall, Father thanked them each for their loyalty, their courage. Then he said, "The war is not done until every last invader is driven from our shores. White Harbor must be cleansed of their taint, the outlying villages rebuilt, and the families who fled must be welcomed home. Then we will see to it that no foreign empire dares test us again." A roar of approval answered him, though it was tempered by the knowledge of how many we had lost. But still, it was the roar of a free people. In the ensuing months, Edric led a decisive campaign to liberate White Harbor, aided by a swelling tide of northern volunteers. The battered Valyrian garrison there could not withstand the might of thousands of men who had discovered they could kill dragons. After a brief, violent struggle, White Harbor was ours again, though it was left in ruins. The Manderley Keep needed extensive rebuilding, and the harbor quays had been burned to stumps. Still, the city once more flew the Wolf's Head banner. Edric and Lord Manderley vowed that it would be rebuilt bigger and stronger, with wharfs that could weather any foe. Meanwhile, Father and I remained at Winterfell, ensuring that the ravaged farmland was replanted with what seeds we had left before the next frost. We began clearing rubble from the collapsed towers, rebuilding scorpions that would become a permanent part of our defenses. The banners of the dire wolf still flew atop the highest intact tower, snapping in the crisp wind. Often I would stand by the weirwood gazing at the courtyard where the carcass of the gold dragon had once smoldered. We had it removed and buried in a deep pit beyond the walls, but the memory lingered. I would close my eyes and recall the day when the walls shook under dragonfire and the sky roared with death, and we found our courage in the face of it. I recalled how Father, battered and scorched, still rose to plunge his sword into the High Magus's heart. I remembered the moment my scorpion bolt found its mark and how it felt to fight despair with a single breath and a pull of a trigger. As news from the south trickled north, it was said that the Valyrians had not fared much better elsewhere. In some areas, local lords had bent the knee, but the seeds of rebellion were sown. A rumor circulated that in the free city of Pentos, uprisings had begun against Valyrian governors. Others hinted that a new power was stirring in the islands of Dragonstone, a family called Targaryen, rumored to have parted ways with the freehold. The tapestry of war and politics across the sea was as tangled as any, but one thing was clear: the Valyrian freehold had found Westeros a more difficult conquest than they imagined. For the first time in centuries, they had tasted something akin to defeat. Of course, we in the north did not care to press our advantage across the sea. Our land was devastated enough. We focused on rebuilding, burying our dead, and forging new alliances among our houses. The scars on the land and on our souls would remain for generations. But a sense of fierce pride took root in every heart. We had faced the freehold itself and survived. By the time the snows started to fall in earnest, Father declared that we had done all we could to secure what was left of that year's harvest. Some lords grumbled that we would feel the pinch of famine, and they were right. But better a hungry winter than a fiery grave. Together we would endure, as Starks and Bannermen always had. That evening Father summoned me to his solar. The air was chill despite the blazing hearth. He stood by the window looking out at the yard. When I entered, he turned, and in his eyes I saw a tenderness he seldom revealed. "Branna," he said quietly, "you have helped save this house. Your bolt killed the greatest dragon. Your wit sustained our supplies and counsel. The North owes you a debt, as do I." I felt my cheeks warm. "I only did what was necessary. What all of us did." He nodded slowly. "Perhaps. But I wish you to know that your mother would have been proud. And that I am proud." He lifted his hand, setting it on my shoulder. "You have my gratitude and my respect, daughter." Emotion swelled in my chest. I had always been the youngest, always overshadowed by Edric's sword or Father's leadership. To hear that from him was worth more than any crown. I blinked back tears and pressed my hand over his. "Thank you, Father." He exhaled, and for a moment he seemed smaller. No longer the stalwart lord, but a tired man who had carried too many burdens. "We have much to rebuild. It will be a long road. But so long as a Stark sits in Winterfell, the North endures." I inclined my head. The North endures. In the days and months that followed, that became our motto, echoing from one settlement to the next. We had fought off the might of Valyria, an empire that spanned continents, known for its unstoppable dragons and unholy magic. We had remained free. Our towers might be blackened, our fields scorched, but our hearts still beat with defiance. Step by step, stone by stone, we set about the work of repair. Winterfell's scars became the stories we passed on to the next generation: the black scorch mark near the main gate, the shattered tower where men fired the scorpion bolt that brought down the black dragon, the courtyard where Father slew the High Magus. Sometimes I would see Father or Edric standing on the battlements, gazing at the horizon, lost in memories of that brutal siege. Sometimes I heard men telling tales of how we'd toppled not one but 4 dragons, spun into grand legends even as the heartbreak was still fresh. There were nights I woke from dreams of roaring flames, but I found solace in the simple truth: when the moment of greatest terror came, we found the courage to fight back. We never learned precisely what further strife happened in Valyria afterward. Some said the freehold turned inward to punish the generals and mages who had failed. Others whispered that the empire was fracturing, plagued by internal rivalries and ominous signs of doom. Some predicted that they would return with a mightier force one day. But we in the north carried on, our gates barred, our scorpions ready, our eyes upon the skies. If they came again, we would be waiting. For me, life settled into a new rhythm. I continued to oversee the distribution of supplies, to advise father on matters of trade and reconstruction. When Edric finally returned from White Harbor, triumphant yet subdued by all he had seen, we stood in the courtyard and embraced tightly, tears in our eyes for the many friends we lost. Then we walked the walls together, speaking in low voices about the future. We dreamed of a time when the North could know peace, when children could grow up without nightmares of dragons overhead. He smiled faintly, saying, "We'll see it done, Brenna." And so ended the war that could have broken us, but did not. Valyria declared war on the North before the doom ever came for them, and they failed to subjugate us. In that failure, they earned a place in our songs as the greatest threat we ever faced, and a testament to the savage, unyielding nature of our land and people. We paid for freedom in blood, but it remained ours. No bards would ever capture the entire truth, the stench of burning flesh, the tears of orphans, the fear in every heartbeat as dragons circled overhead. Nor would they fully capture the steely will of my father, the resourcefulness of my brother, or the defiance in the eyes of every northerner who stood upon these walls. Our story was etched into our hearts, seared by dragonfire and cooled by the bitter northern wind. I stand here still, beneath the reddening leaves of the weirwood, recalling the day those wings blotted out the sun. I remember how all seemed lost, how we prayed for mercy that never came. Yet we found in ourselves the strength to endure. That is the legacy of the North. For we were forged in frosts and storms, taught to stand when others would yield. And stand we did, our battered blades raised to the sky, unbroken by the might of the freehold, unburned by the flames of dragons. Some say that if it were not for the seeds of internal conflict within Valyria, or if they had brought more dragons, we would be naught but ash. Perhaps so. But the truth is simpler. In that hour of greatest peril, the North kept faith with itself. We fought together, bled together, and though the cost was dear, we held to the old ways, to loyalty, to resolve, to a grit forged by cruel winters, and we triumphed. Should the dragons ever return, we will tell our children's children what happened when Valyria came the first time, how the North refused to bend. And they shall know that the blood of the first men still runs hot in our veins, tempered like steel in the heart of winter. We do not kneel. We do not break. Winter is coming, the old words say, and we stand ready. The snow was falling again when I first realized how precariously our victory balanced on the edge of a knife. Weeks had passed since the destruction wrought by Valyria's legions, and Winterfell still smelled faintly of charred wood and stone dust. Some nights, when the wind blew a certain way, I could swear I caught the lingering scent of dragonfire. But as the days stretched on, I saw people returning to their tasks with the stoic determination that defined the North. Blacksmiths hammered, carpenters rebuilt, the wounded learned to walk on crutches or wield a blade left-handed if that was all they could still manage. We were healing. And yet a sense of unease hung in the air. There had been no further sign of the surviving dragons, no new sightings of Valyrian galleys on the horizon. It was the quiet that worried me most. My father, Lord Torrhen Stark, convalesced from his wounds, but at dawn each day he found the strength to walk the battlements. He never wore the same untroubled expression he had possessed in my childhood. An old heaviness etched his brow, and when he looked to the south, I knew he was pondering the possibility of another invasion. He would pause near the scorched courtyard, now partially cleared of rubble, and stare at the spot where the high Magus Aranis and his gold-scaled dragon had fallen. I knew he was wrestling with the same question that plagued me. Did we destroy just one tentacle of a vast, coiling monster, or did our victory truly break Valyria's hold on Westeros? My brother Edric had already left for White Harbor alongside Lord Manderley, leading a contingent of men to drive out any final pockets of Valyrian resistance. We had word the city was halfway reclaimed, though repairs would take years. I tried to imagine the once grand harbor with its broken quays and blackened watchtowers, and I felt a pang of sorrow for all that had been lost. But Edric wrote in hopeful tones, praising the spirit of the people who had survived. He said they all seemed determined to rebuild an even better White Harbor, a place that would never again be so vulnerable to dragonfire. We have our scorpions on the walls and our archers patrolling the coast, he wrote. If the Valyrians attempt another landing here, we'll send them back to their freehold in pieces. Encouraging as his words were, I could not shake my unease. At Winterfell, a constant influx of ravens arrived bearing reports from the coast and from inland strongholds. Some sightings were likely rumor, like the story of a peasant who claimed he saw a flame-colored dragon devouring sheep in the western hills, or the traveler who swore he encountered a Valyrian sorcerer in a ragged cloak wandering the marshes near Moat Cailin. These stories had a way of springing up in the aftermath of great catastrophes. People saw shadows, heard roars in the night, conjured nightmares from the corners of their minds. But we sifted through all these reports for any grain of truth, because if a new legion marched, or if any of the surviving dragons had turned north again, we would need to know. Despite everything, life resumed its rhythms. The blacksmith's forge rang day and night, as if the pounding of hammers could drown out memories. The training yard in Winterfell's Bailey saw new recruits drilling with wooden spears, practicing how to coordinate under the threat of dragon fire. I spent my days coordinating shipments of grain, ensuring families displaced by the war could find shelter. In the evenings, my father and I dined in the great hall, which was emptier than it once was. Sometimes we took our meal with a handful of our senior bannermen, men who had fought in the courtyard and still bore the shock of it in their eyes. We spoke of repairs, provisions, the upcoming winter, and always of our watchfulness against any future threat from beyond the seas. Though I managed the daily tasks diligently, I felt an undercurrent of restlessness. My father relied on me more than ever since Edric was away, but I struggled under the weight. Each night, in my bedchamber, I half expected to hear the thunder of wings or see an orange glow in the sky. Even a crackling in the hearth made my heart skip. I dreamed about the siege, the roar of dragons, the screams of men. Sometimes I dreamed of that moment on the walls when I aimed the scorpion at the gold dragon, how my breath had caught in my throat. The memory was both pride and nightmare, because I knew how narrow our margin of triumph had been. It would not always be so if they came again in greater force. But no new invasion materialized, and for a time quiet reigned, allowing us to nurse the hope that perhaps the Freehold's internal strife had diverted its attention. With the High Magus fallen, rumor held that factions within Valyria vied for power, squabbling among themselves. Distance, too, shielded us. The sea that separated Westeros from Essos was vast, and it might be that no new fleet would dare risk these cold shores, especially once word of our dragon-killing scorpions spread. Still, we were not naive enough to let our guard down. One mid-morning, with winter's wind rattling the shutters, I was in the library with Maester Halleys when a messenger arrived. He was a young man from House Glover, cheeks flushed from the chill. He bowed to me, still unaccustomed to seeing a woman at the heart of Winterfell's affairs, and handed me a sealed parchment. The look in his eyes made my pulse quicken. I broke the seal and read swiftly. Lord Glover had received an urgent raven from one of his vassals near the Wolfswood. A group of armed strangers was spotted in the forest, bearing no clear sigil, possibly wearing foreign steel. They'd taken over an abandoned holdfast and were rumored to be speaking a strange language. Some said it was Valyrian. Lord Glover's men approached, but the strangers vanished deeper into the trees, leaving signs of recent kills and half-burned campfires. The Glover men tried to track them but found only footprints leading north, or possibly northeast, into the thicker part of the Wolfswood. My heart thudded. Mercenaries, perhaps? Or surviving remnants of the Valyrian army who had refused to sail home. It would not be surprising that some lost or desperate band, cut off from their main host, had taken to banditry. Even if it was only that, it posed a threat to stability in the region, and it might also be something more sinister. Had a Valyrian sorcerer survived? Were they planning sabotage or infiltration? That was what our father most feared. Not a grand legion, but a hidden dagger in the dark. I showed the missive to Maester Halleys, who read it thoughtfully. He glanced up, eyes worried. "I'll inform your father at once." Father met me in his solar minutes later, flanked by two of our more seasoned captains. He read the letter over, lips pressing into a line. Then he said, "I'll go myself. We can't risk some remnant of the Freehold festering in our woods." I spoke up. "You're still recovering, Father. We can send a force of men. Let me lead them." He gave me a small, weary smile. "You would brandish a sword, my daughter?" I hesitated. I had trained enough to defend myself if needed, but I was no knight. My place had always been to oversee supplies, to advise. Edric was the warrior. "I can lead them in the sense that I know strategy," I said. "I'll take one of our captains if you insist, but I won't have you riding out with half-healed wounds." He studied me, and for a moment I saw a flicker of conflict in his eyes, paternal protectiveness warring with trust in my capabilities. At last, he breathed out. "You're right. I'll remain here, but let Captain Wyler take command of the men. You'll ride with him, represent House Stark, make the decisions if the need arises. But promise me you'll keep yourself safe." I agreed. And so it was that on a gray afternoon I donned warm riding leathers, took a short sword at my belt, though I hoped I would never need to use it, and joined a detachment of 100 men-at-arms. Captain Weiler was a tall, broad-shouldered man who had fought at the courtyard siege, carrying scars up his left arm. He gave crisp orders as we rode out, taking the King's Road north first, then veering west toward the Wolfswood. Snow dusted the edges of the road and bare branches rattled overhead. A hush lay upon the land, broken only by the clopping of hooves and the jingle of harnesses. Traveling with armed men reminded me of the war. My mind flitted back to the sight of so many battered soldiers returning to Winterfell from White Harbor. But I also felt a grim determination settle over me. If these strangers were indeed Valyrian, or allied with them, we could not afford to let them roam free. They might be spies, saboteurs, or something worse. As we entered the Wolfswood, the ancient pines closed around us, their trunks thick as castle towers. The air took on the cool scent of damp earth and needles. Ravens croaked overhead, watchers among the branches. My men wore heavier furs now, hoods drawn against the chill. We followed the old tracks left by Glover scouts, searching for signs of recent passage. Often, we dismounted to examine footprints or to check hollow log shelters for signs of a camp. We found occasional evidence: ash from a fire that was not too old, a leather strap once a part of a saddle or pack. We discovered a footprint that seemed made by a foreign-style boot, narrower and with a distinctive pattern of nails. Captain Weiler inspected it and shook his head grimly. This is no mere northern bandit. Could be something else. We pressed on for days, deeper into the woods than I had ever been, following every lead. The land was lonely, only the hush of wind in the pines, the slow swirl of snow drifting from the high canopy. One evening, just as twilight settled, we reached an abandoned holdfast. Its walls were half collapsed, wooden beams rotted with age. Glover men had left a marking on a post, indicating they'd scouted the place. But as we examined the interior, we found signs of a recent presence. Footprints in the muddy yard, scraps of fresh poultry bones, and a battered iron device that looked strangely like part of a weapon latch, one that was not of Westerosi design. That night, we made camp in the courtyard. The men set watches, keeping the fires low. I slept in my cloak near one of the huts, my ears tuned for the slightest crack of a twig. Sometime past midnight, I jerked awake, unsure of what had stirred me. I heard only the sigh of wind. I sat up, heart pounding, and stared across the gloom at the men on watch. Their silhouettes were still. Perhaps it was just a dream. Then, from somewhere beyond the collapsed walls, I heard a faint rustling. Before I could call out, the watchers went alert. A flurry of motion. Men standing, hands on hilts. I rose too, trying to see in the dark. A shape flitted between trees. Then another. Captain Weiler hissed, "We have visitors. Form up." My pulse hammered. I tugged on my gloves, fumbling for my sword. The men grouped together, swords drawn, shields up, forming a ring around the center of our camp. Pale moonlight glimmered over the ruined holdfast. I glimpsed a figure dart along a fallen beam. A moment later, an arrow whistled through the air, striking one of our men in the thigh. He cried out, collapsing. Shouts erupted as we realized we were under attack. A volley of arrows rained in, clattering off shields and stone. Our archers scrambled to return fire, loosing arrows into the dark. I saw movement near the trees. Someone fleeing as the flicker of our campfire illuminated them. They wore a hood, but I caught a glimpse of pale, foreign steel in their hand. Then they vanished back into the undergrowth. Captain Weiler barked orders, sending half our force after them while the rest secured the holdfast. I found myself crouching behind a chunk of crumbling wall, sword in hand, wishing for the bright day so I could see who we fought. The skirmish continued in bursts. Twice, shapes tried to circle us from the rear, only to be driven off by Weiler's flank. Our men recovered 2 more wounded. By the time dawn lightened the east, we found signs that the attackers had melted away. They left behind a few broken arrows, fletched with black feathers, and footprints leading further north. We quickly searched the area. In the brush, one of our men found a body. The stranger had been felled by an arrow to the chest. He was lean, with olive-hued skin and dark hair. His features were unlike any from the north. When we pulled back his hood, I noticed he wore an amulet shaped like a dragon's head. The metal was an iridescent alloy that refracted the pale morning light. I felt a jolt of recognition. Valyrian steel was sometimes said to shimmer like that. And though I was no expert in foreign jewelry, the stylized shape was unmistakably draconic. Captain Wyler spat. Valyrian. A scout or deserter from the Legion, I reckon. Maybe more of them roam these woods. We discovered no sign of magical implements on him, though the amulet itself felt vaguely ominous. We decided to bury him in a shallow grave as we had no reason to carry the body back. One of the men pried away the amulet, which we would take to Winterfell as proof. I found myself staring at that slender corpse before we covered it with earth, feeling an unsettling pity for him. He had come so far from his homeland, across the sea, past dragonfire and war, only to die in the gloom of the Wolfswood. A part of me, though, was more unsettled by the realization that this was not rumor or ghost story. Valyrian remnants were truly out here, armed and aggressive, lurking in the shadows of our land. We pressed on north for 2 more days, determined to find them. On the 3rd day, we discovered a campsite near a frozen creek. The ashes of a large fire remained, with piles of fish bones. One of our scouts found trampled snow that suggested at least 10 or 15 men had been there. We suspected they traveled light, moving swiftly, probably still heading deeper into the wilderness. Perhaps they thought they could slip around us or vanish into the trackless forest. We debated sending for reinforcements, but Wyler reasoned we could handle a band of 15. So we continued, forging on through the dense pines and brambles. The nights were tense. We doubled our watch, but we encountered no further attacks. At last, nearing the foothills that rose toward the high mountains, we spotted smoke in the distance. Wyler took 5 scouts on foot, instructing me to remain with the main group for safety. They crept ahead stealthily, returning that evening with the news that our foes had built a small palisade on a rocky slope. Likely it was an old free-folk hideout or hunter's camp, fortified with sharpened stakes. Through a spyglass, the scouts saw figures moving inside, wearing a mix of northern cloaks and foreign armor. They seemed prepared to stand their ground. We devised a plan. At dawn, we would surround the hillside and attempt to parley, if only to ascertain their purpose. If they refused to yield, we would root them out by force. I tried to steady my nerves. This was my first real campaign as an emissary of House Stark without my father or brother at my side. I could not let fear or inexperience compromise us. Wyler, noticing my unease, gave a nod of encouragement. Remember, these are cutthroats who burned our villages and ambushed us. Speak firmly. We owe them no quarter if they won't surrender. When dawn arrived, pale and cold, we advanced. The hillside was thick with stones and scraggly brush. We split our force to encircle the camp. I accompanied Wyler's squad up the western slope. As we neared, we heard the bark of a watchman from behind the wooden stakes. Arrows whistled out, one nicking the bark of a tree near my shoulder. We took cover behind an outcrop, and Wyler shouted in the common tongue, "We are men of House Stark. We know you are Valyrian interlopers. Surrender or face death." A brief hush. Then a voice, speaking accented common tongue, replied, "House Stark, so quick to demand. We have no quarrel with you. Let us pass and we will leave these lands." I felt a surge of anger. "You've murdered people in the Wolfswood. Attacked our men. You will answer for those crimes." Another hush. Then the same voice, this time laced with scorn, said, "We have committed no crimes. We did only what was needed to survive in this cold wasteland." Wyler looked to me for direction. My teeth ground. "Surrender and we'll hear your pleas. Refuse and we'll storm this camp." Silence. Then came foreign words, harsh and staccato, presumably instructions among themselves. Moments later, arrows came again, forcing us to flatten against the rocks. One of our men was struck in the shoulder. He fell with a grunt of pain, and the others dragged him behind cover. It was all the answer we needed. They would not surrender. We signaled our archers, who rained arrows at the palisade. The defenders ducked behind their makeshift wall. Then Wyler led a flank of spearmen to approach from the north, where the slope offered partial cover. I motioned to keep the rest of the men in position, providing covering fire. A brutal clash ensued. I could not see all the details from my vantage, but I heard the ring of steel, the shouts of men, the splinter of wood as the spearmen hacked at the palisade. Smoke rose from burning brush. The defenders responded with desperation, but they were outnumbered, their fortifications crude. It took nearly an hour, but at last, a gap opened in the stakes. Our spearmen poured inside. I scrambled around the slope to see the interior, a small clearing with tents, bedrolls, a few crates, the remains of a campfire. Bodies lay strewn about, some in foreign armor, others in rough-spun cloaks. Our men advanced carefully, dispatching those who still resisted. My own breath was ragged with the swirl of smoke and the raw sting of fear. Even if I had not swung my sword in that moment, the chaos of the fight flooded my senses. One man tried to flee through a narrow ravine at the rear, only to be captured by a pair of our archers. They forced him back at arrow point. He was bleeding from a slash on his cheek, eyes wild. Another figure, presumably the leader who had shouted earlier, lay sprawled on the ground with an arrow protruding from his side. He stared up at us, gasping, a trickle of blood on his lips. I knelt beside him, ignoring Weiler's cautionary hand on my shoulder. "Who are you?" I demanded. "Why are you here?" His dark eyes fixed on mine. He was young, maybe mid-20s, with that same olive skin, hair cropped short. His accent was thick when he answered. "We are all that remains. Our legion was shattered. We would not go back. Back is death. We needed somewhere to live." I swallowed hard. "You attacked our people. We tried to take what we needed." His face twisted in pain and he coughed blood. "We had no illusions that your lord would show mercy to Valyrian stragglers. This is the north," I said grimly, "not some lawless land. If you had come peacefully, you might have appealed for quarter." He let out a wet laugh that turned into a wheeze. "Peacefully? We saw how you treat the freehold. You kill dragons. What chance did we have but to hide?" I stared at him, uncertain whether to feel revulsion or pity. He was the enemy, yes, but I saw only a dying young man far from home, an invader turned fugitive. Something in me ached with the tragedy of it. Still, the reality was plain. They had brought terror to our land, and we had no reason to believe any oath of good conduct from them now. He coughed again, sputtering blood, and his eyes grew glassy. Before I could say another word, he shuddered and went still. I exhaled, rising slowly. All around me, the dead lay thick, a half-dozen Valyrian ex-soldiers, 4 of our own. Weiler moved among the corpses, checking if any still breathed. Some did, but those were grievously wounded. We took the one man we'd captured alive to question. In guttural common tongue, he insisted they had only wished to carve out a life in the forest, away from the war. But he admitted that they were part of the legion that seized White Harbor, that they'd fled when the city fell, and that some carried instructions from a minor Valyrian mage. The nature of those instructions he claimed not to know. Perhaps only the leader had known the full truth. We stripped the camp of weapons, documents, anything that might give us insight. I found a half-burned scroll near one of the tents. The script was in High Valyrian with diagrams that looked like arcane symbols. Maester Halleys might be able to decipher them. As for the survivors, there were only 2, both wounded. Captain Weiler decided we would bring them back to Winterfell in chains. They might stand trial or at least prove a source of information about what was truly happening across the sea. By midday, we set the palisade afire, not wanting to leave a shelter for any other stragglers. We buried our dead, said some words for them, and continued south again. I rode in silence for a long time, my mind replaying the dying man's words. "We saw how you treat the freehold. We kill dragons, so they assume we have no mercy. But they had come to conquer us in the first place, burned our people, demanded we bend the knee and send hostages to a foreign land." Still, it was sobering to realize these soldiers had once been proud members of an army that spanned continents, yet now they were reduced to banditry in our woods, hunted and desperate. War had shattered them and we had inflicted the final blow. We reached Winterfell a few days later, bringing our 2 captives and what we had salvaged. The battered men gawked at the walls, clearly shocked to see them still standing after the siege. Father received our report with a grave nod. One captive was placed in the dungeons under heavy guard, while the other, injured worse, was taken to the maester's care, but also under guard. Father then had me, Captain Weiler, and Maester Halleys gather privately to examine the half-burned scroll. Halleys squinted at the Valyrian script, occasionally rubbing at the parchment as if he wished to glean its secrets by touch. Eventually, the old maester said, "I can parse some of it. The diagrams suggest an incantation for bridging distances or communicating across great expanses. A flame-sending or fire-binding. It references a name, Doratus. Likely another Valyrian mage. Perhaps these soldiers carried instructions to maintain contact with him." Father's brow tightened. Could they have used it to summon more dragons? Or call for reinforcements? Maester Halleys shrugged, spreading his hands. "It's not entirely clear. The incantation is incomplete. If they intended to use it, they probably needed the rest of the text. Or perhaps the leader carried more knowledge in his head. If we'd captured him alive, he let the thought drift. We all understood it was too late for that." Captain Weiler cleared his throat. "My lord, if I may speak freely, this was a small band. But the land is large. There could be others scattered in different regions. We should root them out before they consolidate." Father nodded. Agreed. We'll send word to all our bannermen, remain vigilant. If any strangers matching this description are found, they must be seized. Then he turned to me. You did well, Branna. The Wolfswood is safer now. I accepted his praise with a nod, though inside I still felt an uneasy mixture of pride and regret. War leaves no pure victories, only harsh necessities. In the days that followed, Father questioned the prisoners personally with me present. He sat across from the captured Valyrian in the chill of the dungeon's antechamber, a single torch flickering on the stone walls. The man was sallow-cheeked, nursing a bandaged arm, eyes darting with fear. Father asked him about the scroll, about this mage named Doratus, about whether there were more Valyrian groups hiding in the north. He answered in fits and starts, disclaiming knowledge of any greater plan. He claimed they were merely survivors seeking refuge, that their legion commanders had abandoned them, that this Doratus was rumored to be searching for powerful artifacts in Westeros. I felt the hairs on my arms rise at the mention of artifacts. Another piece in a puzzle that kept twisting. Father demanded details, but the man only repeated rumors that Doratus had an interest in dragon lore and in certain ancient runes carved into the heart of the north, perhaps in crypts or caves. None of it sounded certain, or at least he pretended ignorance. Father pressed further, but got little. At last, the prisoner grew sullen and refused to speak. Father ordered him taken back to his cell under guard. That night, as I paced the courtyard, I kept returning to the idea that Valyria's interest in the north might not have been solely conquest. Could there be some deeper reason? The ancient kings of the first men had left barrows and crypts across this land. The children of the forest had their sacred groves hidden away. Perhaps the Valyrians believed old magic slept here, and they wished to harness it. But it was only speculation. We had enough troubles without chasing shadows of rumor. Life pressed on. Father continued to direct the repairs of Winterfell. Masonry work advanced on the collapsed tower, the smiths forged new scorpion bolts, and we stored grain for the winter. Occasionally, ravens brought more reassuring news. Edric had fully secured White Harbor, forcing the last pockets of Valyrian holdouts to surrender or flee. House Mandoli was forging alliances with northern fisherfolk, ensuring the port would soon be functional again. We also learned that the Karstarks retook a small keep along the coast that Valyrians had seized earlier in the campaign. The foreign garrison there had left in a hurry. Everywhere, it seemed, the enemy's grip was loosening. Then, near the end of the month, we received an unexpected visitor. A rider from the Neck arrived, traveling under a neutral banner, requesting parley with the Warden of the North. Father invited him in, suspecting it might concern trade or news of southern lords. But when the man removed his helmet, he proved to be a knight of House Dane, from far-off Dorne. This astonished us, for seldom did Dornishmen journey so far north. His name was Ser Rhaemar Dane, he said, and he bore tidings from the southern principalities. Valyria's forces had also pressed into Dorne, but they met fierce resistance from the deserts and mountains. Now, in the face of internal strife within the freehold, the last of their occupying forces had withdrawn from Sunspear. But House Dane had gleaned worrisome intelligence. Apparently, some Valyrian warlords were forging alliances with certain ambitious houses in the Stormlands and the Reach, hoping to orchestrate a new push into Westeros, perhaps not on the same scale, but enough to reassert dominion over key ports and castles. If that was true, the North could not yet rest easy. Father thanked Ser Rhaemar for this news and offered him hospitality. Over supper in the Great Hall, the Dornish knight said that rumors of our victory had spread across the continent. Many in the south had whispered that we must have used dark northern witchcraft to slay dragons, or that some demon of ice fought at our side. Others believed it was simply northern resilience, a testament to our refusal to bend. Either way, the name Stark carried a new weight. Ser Rhaemar emphasized that Dorne sought alliances with any who opposed the Valyrian threat. He hinted that Prince Corin Martell, the ruling prince of Dorne, might wish to send envoys to Winterfell, an unthinkable prospect in ages past. But times were changing. Father listened thoughtfully. Our armies were weary, winter was near, but forging new ties with the south could prove beneficial if Valyria regrouped. We parted with the understanding that once the roads were more passable, we would welcome Dornish delegations. The next morning, Ser Rhaemar rode out, heading back to the Prince's Pass, carrying our polite greetings. As he departed, the wind whipped ice crystals across the yard. I watched from the gatehouse and wondered if House Dane truly believed the freehold still hungered for Westeros, or if this was simply a rumor. The truth, I suspected, was that no empire as vast as Valyria retreated without retaining some designs. The weeks slipped by, drifting into the deeper heart of winter. Snow blanketed the courtyards, turning the rubble from black to white. Workers struggled in the bitter cold, but Father refused to halt the repairs. He often said, "We do not know what storms the future may bring." He wanted Winterfell strong physically and spiritually. Word of our victory had drawn new settlers from less stable corners of the north, people seeking the protection of our walls. They brought their meager belongings and set up in makeshift shelters around the outer bailey. Father granted them space, mindful that more hands would help rebuild and more watchers would strengthen our vigil. Edric returned at last, riding into the courtyard on a frosty morning. I rushed out to greet him and we embraced, ignoring the swirl of snow. He looked tired, with the burn on his forearm still healing, but his eyes shone when he spoke of White Harbor's reclamation. "They're calling me Edric the Unburnt," he teased, though I was clearly burned a bit. We shared a laugh, relief flooding me. He had always possessed that easy charm, that hearty resilience. But I saw beneath the jokes an older wariness. He had watched men die in the city's flames, and it left a mark. Over that day's meal, Father and Edric discussed the situation along the coast. The Valyrian ships were gone, but the harbor needed extensive rebuilding. The Manderleys were forging new trade agreements with Bravos and Pentos, ironically enough, in hopes that commerce could revive. Rumors from Bravos suggested that some in the free cities believed the freehold was teetering. But teetering is not the same as falling, Edric remarked. If they gather their strength, they might come again in a year or 10. We must be prepared, Father agreed. The only reason they withdrew is that they're fighting among themselves. If a stronger faction arises, the dragons might fly again. The words hung like a chill in the hall. But we carried on with the tasks at hand, determined not to let fear paralyze us. It was about a fortnight later that a new crisis emerged, one that tested us in ways we had never foreseen. It began innocuously enough. A traveler arrived at Winterfell's gates, half dead from the cold, babbling about shadows in the night. The guards brought him in. Maester Halleys tended to him, giving him broth and bedrest. The traveler said he hailed from one of the small hamlets north of Long Lake and that a monstrous figure had been prowling the forests, snatching people from their homes. In his delirium, he described it as a beast of black flame or some twisted half-dragon. Initially, we dismissed this as a product of fever and fear. Monsters roamed only in old tales, or so we told ourselves. Wolves, bears, those were real threats in the north. Dragons? We had seen them, but none prowled the forests like a beast on 4 legs. However, within days, more reports arrived by Raven from the same region. Villages abandoned. Livestock slaughtered in strange ways, burned or half-eaten. The local lord appealed for immediate help, claiming the people were convinced a demon roamed the night. Father frowned over these letters, suspecting they were exaggerations or perhaps the work of outlaws. Yet the repeated references to scorch marks, to unnatural flames, set us on edge. Could a wounded dragon have found its way that far north? Or was this some new threat unleashed by Valyrian sorcery? Despite our misgivings, Father decided we could not ignore the pleas of our people. We assembled a group of rangers and trackers along with a handful of skilled archers led by Edric himself. The plan was to travel to the hamlets near Long Lake, gather first-hand information, and put an end to whatever terror haunted the region. I volunteered to join, though Father insisted I remain in the rearguard. "We cannot risk both my children at once," he said. But I argued that my experience in the Wolfswood had proven I could handle myself. In the end, he relented. So Edric and I set forth, accompanied by 50 stout men, among them the best huntsmen in the north. We traveled east, then north, braving icy roads. The wind howled each night, and the men told tales around the campfires, speculation about what lurked out there. Some joked it was a dragon with 3 heads. Others said it might be an escaped Valyrian warbeast, a rumor we had never even heard of, but in these times imagination ran wild. Edric tried to reassure them with bravado, though I saw a flicker of concern in his eyes. Upon reaching the hamlets, we found them deserted, doors swung wide, snow drifting into empty homes. The silence was eerie. Occasionally, we discovered ghastly evidence of violence. Charred remains of a cow or goat in a barn, stinking of burned flesh. Once, near a well, we found a patch of ground scorched black, as if by intense heat. There were footprints in the snow, unusual footprints elongated with claw-like impressions. Our trackers exchanged uneasy glances. One of them muttered, "No beast of these woods leaves prints like that." We set up camp in one of the more defensible hamlets, hoping to lure out the culprit if it indeed prowled the night. Snow fell thickly, muffling everything. The men took turns on watch, scanning the darkness with torches. The first 2 nights passed in tense but fruitless waiting. On the third night, I was awakened by a shout. I grabbed my cloak and stumbled outside to find Edric and a half-dozen men running down the main lane, torches bobbing. I followed, heart hammering. They had heard something, a roar or a screech, echoing through the forest. Our group formed a defensive line at the edge of the hamlet, peering into the swirling snow. Then we glimpsed a shape moving between the dark pines, something large, glinting with a faint orange glow like embers under black scales. My blood turned to ice. Could it be a leftover dragon? But it moved low to the ground, not on wings. Another screech rent the air, half bestial, half hiss. One of our men loosed an arrow, which vanished into the trees. Suddenly a burst of flame lit the gloom, bright orange tongues licking the snow, sending steam billowing. Men shouted, recoiling. For one terrifying heartbeat, I saw the creature's silhouette. Something that might have once been a small draconic beast, but twisted, stunted, as if its wings were stumps or folded too tightly. The muzzle was elongated. The eyes glowed red. It scampered on all fours with a fluid speed that no natural animal should possess. Gods, Edric breathed, lifting his sword. He motioned for the archers to spread out. Another torch flew, illuminating the creature again. It hissed and spat a plume of fire that ignited a nearby fence. The men held an alarm, diving aside. Arrows whistled. Some found their mark in the beast's hide, but it barely flinched. It let out a choked, rasping scream and bounded forward, slashing with claws that sparked against a shield. A terrified cry followed, and a man fell, flame curling around him. Edric rushed in, sword raised. I stood transfixed, horror and adrenaline surging. This was no simple predator, something about it felt unnatural, as if shaped by vile craft. The fight was a blur. Archers peppered it with arrows, spearmen tried to pin it down, but it moved with terrifying agility, breathing short bursts of flame that set cloaks alight. Edric darted around its flank, slashing at its hindquarters, but the blade skittered off scaled plates. I forced myself to act, snatching a javelin from one of the fallen men. I hurled it with all my might. The javelin struck near the creature's side, penetrating between scales. It roared in pain, thrashing. Edric seized the moment to drive his sword at the base of its neck. A spurt of blackish blood erupted, spraying across the snow. The beast staggered, tried to turn its head to burn him, but more spears came in from the sides. At last, with a guttural snarl, it collapsed, twitching. We stood there, panting, hearts pounding. The men closed in warily. The creature lay in the snow, half-shrouded in steam. Up close, its hide was indeed scaled, with faint ridges where wings might have been. Its eyes were slit like a reptile's, glowing faintly even in death. One man prodded it with a spear, but it did not stir. The stench of sulfur and blood wrinkled my nose. Edric knelt, pressing a hand to his side where the beast's claws had raked him. 7 hells, he muttered. What in the name of all the gods is this thing? No one could answer. Some of the men muttered superstitiously, crossing themselves. One said a demon. A shadow creature. Burn the corpse. But Edric shook his head. No. We need to bring it back to Winterfell. Father must see this. Maester Halleys must examine it. We spent the rest of the night tending to the wounded. 3 men were badly burned, 1 was dead from a claw to the throat. By morning we bound the beast's carcass with ropes, loading it onto a crude sledge. It was heavy, at least the size of a small horse. Its scales had begun to lose some of that ember-like glow, dulling in the daylight. Still, the sight of it made my skin crawl. I could not comprehend how such a creature came to be. Was it truly a dragon stunted by injury or arcane tampering? Could it be the result of some twisted Valyrian experimentation? The notion made me shudder. We traveled back slowly, mindful of the wounded. The roads were worse than before, icy and drifted with snow, but we pressed on. Along the way, curious farmers or refugees gaped at our strange cargo. Rumors spread like wildfire, no matter how we tried to remain discreet. By the time we approached Winterfell's gates, a throng of onlookers had gathered, braving the cold to see this monstrous thing. Father emerged onto the courtyard with wide eyes. He and several bannermen stood speechless as Edric and I recounted the story. The stunted creature was lifted off the sledge and laid on a broad wooden table. Its limbs sprawled unnaturally, and dried black blood clung to the wound at its neck. Father's expression hardened. "It is no common beast," he said. "Does it share any resemblance to the dragons we fought?" "Superficially, yes," Edric answered. But it's smaller, malformed. Its wings are stumps. Some of its scales look melted or fused. It breathes fire, though not as powerfully. And it's savage, as if half feral. Maester Halley's was called at once. He donned thick gloves and cautiously inspected the carcass, prying open its jaws, examining the ridges along its spine. He cut a small incision in its underbelly to look at the organs, grimacing at the foul smell. The anatomy is draconic in many respects, he murmured. Yet certain features, these lumps along the rib cage, the shortened wing bones, suggest a form of mutation, perhaps the result of forced breeding or sorcerous meddling. Valyrians were known for their experiments, though documented references are rare. Father's face was grim. Why would they unleash such a creature here? To spread terror? Halley's shrugged. It may have escaped captivity, or it could have been deliberately set loose. That we cannot say. But if one such beast roams the wild, there could be others. The notion sent a ripple of dismay through the assembled men. We had just fought off the main invasion. Was the North now to be plagued by unnatural horrors lurking in its forests? Father dismissed the crowd, ordering the men to keep the beast's body in the old stable block for further examination. He then convened a council in the great hall, summoning our prominent bannermen and captains. The mood was tense, the memory of Dragonfire still fresh in everyone's mind. Now we faced a new menace, or perhaps an old menace in a mutated form. During the council, Edric explained the footprints, the scorch marks, the pattern of the kills. He believed this beast had prowled for weeks, possibly feeding on livestock or people, guided by cunning rather than mere animal instinct. Some argued that if there was one, others might exist. Perhaps the wounded dragons that fled the siege had laid eggs somewhere in the wild, or Valyrian stragglers were breeding lesser dragons in secret. The men spat curses at the thought. Father folded his arms. We must find answers. Halley's, continue your study of the carcass. Edric, send word to all our bannermen. Watch for any sign of these creatures. If a rumor arises of missing livestock or scorched earth, investigate swiftly. We cannot let this become an epidemic. I listened, recalling the scroll from the Wolfswood camp referencing a mage named Daradas. A cold thought struck me, could that mage, or others like him, be behind this? Was there a deliberate attempt to sow chaos in the north through monstrous creations? I mentioned my suspicion, and Father nodded. It's possible. The Freehold was known for such dark arts. But how to prove it or stop it is another question. That night, unable to sleep, I stood in the godwood by the heart tree. The hush of falling snow muffled the courtyard's distant noises. I closed my eyes and prayed for guidance. We had survived a direct war with Valyria, but these aftershocks, rogue soldiers, twisted beasts, felt like a war of a different kind, fought in shadows and ambushes. My breath curled in the frigid air as I wondered how many horrors still lurked beyond the ken of ordinary men. In the days that followed, Maester Halley's examined the corpse meticulously. He found lumps in its skull that suggested an unnatural graft or growth, as if someone had tampered with it from an early stage of development. I suspect necromantic or sorcerous interference, he said, a tremor in his voice. This could be the result of experiments to breed war beasts. Maybe the Valyrians tried to create smaller, more controllable dragons. The thought churned my stomach. If they had succeeded in forging more of these twisted creatures, the North might face a scourge that no single battle could end. At least with a full-grown dragon, we knew the threat soared overhead. But these things could slink through forests, terrorize remote villages. They were not as mighty, but they were cunning, elusive, and savage. A few ravens from distant corners of the north brought scattered rumors. A farmer near the hills glimpsed glowing eyes at night. A burnt carcass of a deer was found in the rills, another in the foothills near the Dread Fort. We could not confirm any of these as real. Yet each report put us on edge, forcing us to send out patrols which strained our already limited resources. Winter's cold grew harsher, making travel perilous. Some lords began complaining about the expense of so many scouts, especially when supplies were short. Amid this mounting tension, Father summoned me and Edric to his solar. He looked more worn than I had ever seen him, lines deepening at his temples. We must consider if we're dealing with a rogue phenomenon or something orchestrated, he began. The mention of that mage Daradas, the possibility of other Valyrian sorcerers. We need intelligence from beyond the north. If these creatures were created intentionally, it might be part of a larger plot. Edric leaned forward, frowning. You want us to send men across the sea? Father nodded. Perhaps not immediately. But we cannot remain blind to what brews in Essos. If the freehold is fracturing, it may spawn breakaway factions. Any one of them might harbor vengeance toward the north. We are no longer just some distant land. We slew their high magus, destroyed or crippled their dragons. They may see us as a threat or a prize. We need an ear in Essos. I exchanged a glance with Edric. The notion of infiltration or espionage was foreign to the North's straightforward ways. We were used to guarding against wildlings or the occasional southern foray. But the game of secrets across the sea was a different realm entirely. Father exhaled. It might be that we can send an envoy to Bravos or Pentos gather news. For now, let us focus on the immediate threat. We must find if more beasts prowl our lands. And if so, destroy them. He tasked Edric with coordinating widespread patrols while I was to remain in Winterfell helping Halleys gather reports and record any sightings. Meanwhile, Father himself planned to travel to Moat Cailin to discuss with Lord Reed potential alliances or watchers in the bogs since any approach from the south or infiltration might come through the neck. We parted each weighed down by a sense of foreboding. The war had ended, but the north was still haunted by the tendrils of Valyria's shadow. Edric organized search parties that fanned out across the region in rotating shifts, each carrying horns to sound an alarm if they encountered anything. On the second week of this operation, horns did indeed blow, echoing across the bleak moors south of Winterfell. A messenger arrived, nearly collapsing at the gate, reporting that a farmstead had been attacked by a scaled beast that spat fire. Edric and a company of men rode out at once. I paced the courtyard in anxious dread until they returned the following night, exhausted and battered. They'd found the creature attacking a stable, cornered it and slain it. This one was smaller than the first, a female by the look of it. Another mutated dragon. 2 in as many weeks. It was enough to confirm that we faced a genuine infestation of horrors. Rumors began running wild among our people that perhaps the ground was cursed or that an ancient power had awakened. Father tried to quell the rumors by reinforcing that these were creations of foreign sorcery, not some sign of the old god's wrath. Still, fear took root. Some families from outlying villages packed up and fled toward the coast, hoping to find refuge near White Harbor or on smaller isles. Others petitioned Father to shelter in Winterfell for the winter, straining our capacity. I spent countless hours in the library, poring over any tome that might shed light on draconic anomalies. Halleys assisted, rummaging through fragments of half-legible manuscripts. We found references to wyverns in Sithorios, vicious reptilian beasts that breathed no fire. Another text spoke of fireworms, rumored to infest the 14 flames near Valyria. But none precisely matched these stunted, flame-spewing creatures. The only consistent pattern was the possibility of magical crossbreeding or alchemical tampering. I remembered the days leading up to the siege, how we had dreaded dragons. Yet these things, though lesser in might, were in some ways more insidious. They preyed upon the unprotected, striking from shadows. As winter's chill deepened, Father returned from Moat Cailin, reporting no new sightings in the bogs, though House Reed would remain alert. Then came a letter from Edric, who was riding the eastern roads near the mountains. He had discovered a man named Thesantis, presumably a Valyrian mage, rumored to be hiding in a dilapidated tower that once belonged to a northern hedge knight. Thesantis was said to travel with caged reptiles, some of them twisted. My heart jolted as I read Edric's words. We suspect he's breeding or controlling these abominations. We ride to confront him. Pray for our success. Father wasted no time. He ordered a second force to assemble under Captain Weiler's command to aid Edric. But the roads were treacherous, thick with snow and ice. It would take days to reach the eastern foothills. Father himself prepared to go, ignoring the complaints of his old injuries. I insisted on coming. He refused at first, but I pleaded that I had become deeply involved in understanding these creatures. At last, he relented. We left a small garrison to hold Winterfell and set forth, grim with purpose. The journey was harsh. Winds howled down from the mountains, and snowdrifts slowed our progress. Men wore heavy cloaks, faces raw and chapped. After days of trudging, we finally approached the region Edric had described, a rocky landscape dotted with pine stands. Local villagers confirmed a rumor of a strange man occupying a crumbling stone tower near the foot of a mountain pass. They whispered of unnatural lights at night, shrieks carried on the wind, livestock vanishing. Father wasted no time, leading our force up a narrow trail until the tower came into view. It was a squat structure of ancient, moss-covered stones, perched precariously on a crag. We saw no guards posted outside, only a battered wooden door. Edric's band was nowhere in sight. Worry twisted in my gut. Father signaled for caution. We spread out archers ready. He and I advanced with a small vanguard approaching the tower's base. The air smelled foul as if rancid meat and sulfur mingled. Father pressed a hand to the door, which stood slightly ajar. We heard nothing inside. We stepped in, swords drawn, and found a cluttered chamber strewn with half-eaten animal carcasses. The stench was overwhelming. Broken crates littered the floor, many containing straw and iron bars as if they'd once been cages. Then I spotted movement in the corner, a figure slumped against the wall. I rushed over, heart hammering, only to recognize with horror one of Edric's men, a Serwyn guard. He was gravely wounded, barely conscious. I knelt, pressing a hand to his cheek. What happened? He mumbled something about a trap, about Edric rushing upstairs, about a monstrous beast. Father barked orders for the rest of the men to search the tower. We found a cramped spiral staircase leading up. The walls echoed with our footsteps. I felt dread coil in my stomach, thinking of Edric confronting some vile mage alone. On the second level, we discovered a scene of carnage. 2 of Edric's men lay dead, their bodies scorched. The stone walls bore black burn marks, and the air reeked of smoke. My father's jaw tightened, and we moved on, step by agonizing step, until we reached the top level, an open chamber half exposed to the elements due to a collapsed roof. There, in the swirling snow, was Edric. He stood facing us, sword in hand, breathing raggedly. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead. At his feet lay the corpse of a twisted reptilian beast, smaller than the one I had seen, but still horrifying, a cluster of spines and half-formed wings. Nearby stood a tall, gaunt man with silver-white hair, robes scorched, apparently pinned against a collapsed portion of wall. The man's eyes flashed with hatred as we entered. Edric turned, relief breaking over his face at the sight of us. "Father Branna," he panted. "I have him cornered. He calls himself the Santis, a disciple of the High Magus. He's been breeding these monsters, though I've cut down what I could find here." Father stepped forward, leveling his sword at the Santis. "In the name of House Stark, you will face justice. Surrender." The mage spat a word in High Valyrian, then hissed in the common tongue, "Justice? You dare speak of justice after you murder my master and his dragons? You are but savage northerners meddling in powers beyond your understanding." Father's voice was steely. "Your powers have cost too many lives already. If you do not yield, you will die here." The Santis let out a harsh laugh, a sound filled with bitterness and desperation. His gaze flicked to the dead monster on the floor. "Fools! You think you have stymied the freehold by slaying a few half-grown abominations? There are countless more in the east. Daratus and others continue our work. The wrath of Valyria will consume you in time." Edric snarled, "Not today," and lunged to disarm him. But the Santis raised a hand, chanting something in a guttural voice. A searing wind whipped through the chamber, swirling snow and sparks. Father and I staggered back, shielding our faces from the sudden heat. Edric braced himself, sword raised. Then the mage's chant broke off in a gasp as one of our archers, having crept up the stairs behind us, let fly an arrow that lodged in his shoulder. The Santis cried out, staggering. Edric rushed in and knocked him to the ground, wrenching a strange glass dagger from his grip. Panting, Father and I advanced. The mage lay pinned, blood staining his robes. His eyes blazed with defiance. He rasped, "You have not won. This land will drown in now." Father struck him in the head with the pommel of his sword, silencing him. Edric exhaled shakily. "We'll take him alive if possible. He may know more about these abominations." We secured the mage with chains. The tower was otherwise empty, save for a handful of monstrous carcasses in cages as well as grotesque lumps of flesh and jars, failed experiments, presumably. The men recoiled in horror, some retching at the smell. Edric knelt by one cage that contained a small, writhing reptile that still breathed, clearly mutated. He drove his sword through the bars, putting it out of its misery. "We can't allow even one of these to survive," he said grimly. We scoured the place for documents. In a battered chest, we found a sheaf of parchments, many in High Valyrian, scrawled with diagrams of serpentine creatures, references to potions, enchantments, and instructions on the infusion of fireblood. Maester Halleys would need to decipher the finer details, but from the images alone, it was clear Thesantis had dedicated himself to breeding and perfecting twisted dragons for warfare. Whether he had acted alone or with a network of Valyrian sorcerers remained uncertain. By the time we left that cursed tower, we had freed the handful of Edric's men who still lived, though half were badly wounded. We burned every cage, every jar, allowing the vile stench to billow into the snow-filled sky. Thesantis, bound and half unconscious, was dragged on a sledge. He muttered incoherently about the doom that shall come, about a new age of fire. Father ignored his rants, focused only on returning him to Winterfell. It was a solemn, weary march home, but we carried with us the one thing we needed most, answers. Back at Winterfell, Maester Halleys treated Thesantis' wounds enough to keep him alive. The mage lay in chains in a secure cell, subdued by sedation. Halleys began translating the parchments we had found, sometimes growing pale at the vile references to forced matings, arcane formulae, and living sacrifice. Late one evening, Halleys knocked on my chamber door, beckoning me to the library. By the glow of candlelight, he revealed a passage that referred to a broader circle of mages across Essos. Some in Volantis, some in Lys, all dedicated to the ascendancy of draconic supremacy. They had apparently branched out from the main line of Valyrian power, forging their own cabals. The text alluded to a hidden fortress in the mountains near the Freehold's heart, where progenitor beasts were kept. A cold dread filled me as I thought of the possibility that dozens, hundreds, even thousands of such abominations might exist. We had only glimpsed a fraction. If that was the direction Valyrian forces might take, we faced a threat beyond a single war. This was a generational danger, a web of dark magic stretching across seas, aimed at forging monstrous armies. Then I remembered that name, Doratus, from the earlier scroll. Here, too, it appeared, Doratus of the Sixth Flame, guardian of the great incubator. Even the words made my skin crawl. We brought this information to Father. He listened with growing dismay. We must question Thesantis directly, he said. Even if we have to break him, the safety of the North depends on us knowing the extent of this threat. Questioning Thesantis proved difficult. He ranted in half-intelligible bursts, spewing curses upon House Stark. He called us murderers of the true fire, spat at us, and refused to answer. When Father threatened him with execution, Thesantis only sneered and said, "Better death than betrayal of the great work." We tried persuading him with the possibility of exile or a less painful end, but nothing moved him. He was fanatical, consumed by a fervor that overshadowed even reason. We realized that short of intense, brutal torture, he would not speak freely. Father considered the matter with a haunted look. We were not torturers by nature, but the cost of ignorance might be high. In the end, Father decided on a different tack. A subtle, consistent wearing down. Starvation, isolation, broken by small mercies. Possibly, if we chipped away at him, he might slip up or reveal details. Meanwhile, we had the parchments to decipher. This process would take time, but time was not on our side. Each new day might see another mutated beast somewhere in the north, or some fresh infiltration. Already, we heard a story out of Bear Island about a fiery lizard seen near the coastline. No confirmation, but the Mormonts were investigating. Winter pressed in, the days short and gray. We toiled, repairing scorpions, training men to respond quickly to sightings. The presence of Thesantis under our roof cast a pall over Winterfell. Some guards whispered that at night they heard him chanting in a foreign tongue, though no one could confirm it. Edric was especially restless, volunteering for any mission that took him beyond the walls. Perhaps he could not bear the knowledge that some new horror might arise any moment. Then, in the bleak midwinter, an event occurred that changed the tide again. A raven arrived from across the sea. It bore the seal of Braavos. Father opened it, reading with narrowed eyes. The Braavosi magister who penned the letter claimed that a rogue faction of Valyrian dragon lords had passed through Pentos, purchasing ships and slaves. Rumor said they aimed to sail west again, but they were also at odds with other Valyrian powers. The magister hinted that Braavos might be inclined to ally with us, or at least exchange information in hopes of containing the Freehold's expansions. Father read this aloud to Edric and me, then set the parchment down. The question is, can we trust Braavos any more than we would trust a fox in a henhouse? They might simply want advantage for themselves. I was thoughtful. Even so, they have reason to fear Valyrian might. If Bravos sees us as an example of successful resistance, they might hope to replicate it or at least learn our methods. Edric folded his arms. We don't exactly have the means to send an expedition across the sea right now. But maybe we can meet them at White Harbor. That could be arranged, Father mused. If we invite a Bravosi envoy to White Harbor in the spring, we might glean more about the state of Essos. Perhaps we can discover if these mutated dragons are a widespread phenomenon. We need to know if the freedmen faction or whoever they are will strike again. So it was decided. We would invite the Bravosi to land at White Harbor once the ice retreated, offering safe passage. Then we would hold a summit, if you could call it that. The Mandois would play host and Father would attend in person if circumstances allowed. That left us the bitter remainder of winter to brace ourselves, to glean more from Thesantis and to root out any remaining beasts. Perhaps by the time the ice thawed, we would have a clearer sense of the danger. But winter nights are long, and the seeds of fear do not wither easily. Tensions rose across the north, small folk feared the next monstrous sighting, lords chafed at the expense of constant patrols, and all the while, our fields lay dormant under snowdrifts. Some muttered that we might face famine if the next harvest was not robust. The scars of war still lingered, and now we had the slow, insidious threat gnawing at our borders. Often I found Father alone by the hearth in his solar, gazing into the flames with unseeing eyes. One such night, I came upon him there, and he gestured for me to sit. We were both silent for a time. Then he spoke in a low voice. I never imagined in all my days that we would struggle against the remnants of Valyria in this fashion. I thought once the siege was lifted, we could rebuild in peace. But the Empire's shadow is long indeed. I placed a hand gently on his. We'll endure as we always have. He sighed. Yes, but at what cost? How many must die before these foreign sorcerers cease to plague us? Sometimes I wonder if I should have sought terms when the envoy first came all those moons ago. If it would have spared us all this. I stared at him, shaken by the hint of doubt in his voice. Father, you did what was right. We could never have bent the knee to those who demanded hostages and tribute. Look how quickly they set White Harbor aflame. There is no true peace in subjugation. He nodded slowly. I know. Yet I worry for the North's future. Each day brings new burdens for our people. I squeezed his hand. We'll find a way. You taught us that strength is found in unity, that we do not face these threats alone. He mustered a faint smile. You speak wisely, as always. Then his gaze turned distant again, reflecting the dancing firelight. As the snows began to lessen in late winter, more tidings trickled in. The Mormonts sent word they had slain a single small reptilian beast near their coastline, perhaps the one rumored. No others were found. The Boltons reported no sightings in their domain, though some suggested the flayed man-banners alone scared away any intruder. House Glover and House Serwyn likewise found no further sign of the monstrous presence. It appeared that the cunning but limited group under Thesantis had been responsible for breeding or releasing a handful of these creatures. Perhaps we had eliminated all the survivors. We could not be certain, but we allowed ourselves a measure of hope. Meanwhile, Thesantis languished in our dungeons. Interrogations continued, wearing him down bit by bit. Maester Halley's discovered references in his notes to a casket of living flame, an artifact apparently hidden somewhere in the north, though the details were cryptic. When pressed, Thesantis only sneered, claiming we would never find it. You only delay the inevitable, he said, almost deliriously. Doratus will come for it and for you. The great work shall not be undone. Father ordered the search for this alleged artifact, but we had no clue where to begin. The cryptic references mentioned the old watchers in the ice, which might imply the far north near the wall, or some ancient ruin. We had no idea. The more we learned, the more we realized the scope of Valyrian cunning. Even though their legions had retreated, pockets of vile knowledge might be scattered across our land like seeds waiting to sprout. We pressed forward with plans for the Bravosi summit in the spring. Edric traveled to White Harbor to coordinate with Lord Manderley. Meanwhile, Father oversaw the final Scorpion repairs in Winterfell, ensuring we would not be caught unprepared if another legion or more twisted beasts came upon us. I continued to study the parchments, gleaning fragments about Valyrian sorcery. Some nights, I dreamed of fire and scaled horrors of an endless labyrinth where draconic beasts screeched in the dark. I would wake, heart-pounding, and wonder if we walked an unending path of conflict. Yet with the approach of spring, a subtle shift in the air brought a sense that perhaps a new season would bring new possibilities. The nights were still cold, but the daylight lasted longer, and the ramparts began to drip with meltwater. Ravens brought news that the Bravosi fleet was sighted off the coast near White Harbor, and Father prepared to journey there to meet them. We decided that I would accompany him while Edric stayed behind to oversee Winterfell's security. DeSantis would remain locked in the dungeon, guarded by men loyal beyond question. If he had allies outside, we would not give them a chance to free him. So we set out, father and I, with a small escort. The road to White Harbor, though improved from the war's aftermath, was still rough, the thaw turning it muddy. But the sense of forward motion raised my spirits. Perhaps if Braavos truly had information on Valyria's internal struggles, we could glean enough to protect ourselves from future invasions or infiltration. Perhaps we might even forge alliances to strike at the root of these twisted experiments. At least, that was the hope I clung to. Arriving in White Harbor, I was struck by how much progress had been made since the siege. Though the walls still bore blackened scars, new stonework rose around the gates. In the harbor, scaffolding bristled around half-rebuilt piers. Ships, including some bearing the Braavosi seal, a silver trident over a purple background, lay at anchor. The city bustled with workers, merchants, the ring of hammers. Lord Manderley greeted us warmly, though sorrow still dulled his eyes at the memory of what his people had endured. He led us to the newly repaired Great Hall in Newcastle, explaining that the Braavosi delegates had arrived a day prior and were eager to begin talks. Father and I entered the hall, finding a small gathering, a Braavosi magister named Lauren Massanero accompanied by half a dozen aides. They stood out in their colorful silks, a stark contrast to our furs and leathers. Magister Lauren was a thin man, elegantly mustached, with a polite but guarded smile. He bowed to father. Lord Stark, your reputation precedes you. We thank you for this audience and for the courtesy extended to our ships. Father inclined his head. We hope it proves fruitful for both sides. Braavos is known for independence from Valyrian rule. Our victories here have not made us wealthy or unscathed, but we stand free. Let us see if that freedom can benefit you as well. Lauren's smile grew. Indeed. Shall we speak frankly of the freehold and its divisions? So began a series of discussions over the next several days. We dined, exchanging pleasantries, but soon delved into the meat of the matter, the various factions within Valyria. According to Lauren, the great freehold was in turmoil after the High Magus's death, with different archons vying for supremacy, each controlling their own dragons and spheres of influence. Some were more traditional, focusing on trade, while others embraced aggressive expansion. Among them, splinter groups of mages conducted questionable experiments, rumored to be raising new forms of draconic beasts. Father and I traded glances, hearts sinking at the confirmation that these twisted creations were not isolated. Braavos, for its part, feared a surge of refugees or a renewed push for conquest by whichever archon triumphed. Lauren was explicit that Braavos had no love for Valyria's imperial ambitions. They saw in House Stark an ally who had proven dragons could be slain. We do not propose an open alliance of armies, Lauren said one afternoon, swirling wine in a silver goblet. Rather, an exchange of intelligence. Braavos has spies in Essos who can track movements of Valyrian forces. You, in turn, know how to repel them on your shores. If another fleet sails for Westeros, we can warn you in advance. Perhaps you can also share your knowledge of forging scorpion bolts that pierce dragonscale. Father considered carefully. Knowledge is power. The North has rarely engaged in such intrigues, but these are new times. If we exchange information, how do we ensure you do not sell it to the highest bidder? Lauren placed a hand to his chest. The Iron Bank invests in many ventures, Lord Stark, but Braavos' foundation rests on resisting Valyrian tyranny. We'd be cutting off our nose to spite our face if we aided them. Our enmity with the freehold is centuries old. And so, tentatively, Father and Lauren hammered out the outlines of an agreement. Braavos would maintain a channel of communication with Winterfell, likely through White Harbor, alerting us to major developments in the east. We, in return, would share the engineering behind our improved scorpions and pass along any knowledge gleaned from captured Valyrian mages or texts about their arcane methods of controlling dragons. It felt precarious, an alliance built on mutual fear of Valyria, but it was a step toward a broader network of resistance. While these negotiations continued, we also learned from the Braavosi that rumors circulated in Essos of a group calling itself the Circle of the Sixth Flame, apparently spearheaded by none other than Doratus. They had seized control of a citadel near the westernmost border of the freehold, rumored to house monstrous creatures in deep vaults. My blood chilled at the name. Thesantis had raved about him, and so had earlier scraps of parchment. The threat was no phantom but a real and gathering darkness. On our final evening of talks, Father, Lauren, and the other dignitaries raised cups of wine to a solemn toast. May this be the first step towards safeguarding our lands from the black wings of tyranny, Lauren intoned. We drank, but my mind flickered with doubt. It would take more than well-meaning pacts to uproot the cunning of Valyrian sorcerers. Still, as the Bravosi departed for their ships, an air of fragile optimism lingered. We had not faced the doom alone. Others saw the threat and stood ready to act. Father and I lingered in White Harbor for a few more days, conferring with Lord Manderley about the city's defenses. We ensured that Scorpion ballistae were mounted on strategic towers, that watchfires were set for quick signaling. Ships in the harbor displayed proud northern colors, bolstering the sense of unity. Then, leaving a small retinue to maintain contact with the Bravosi, we made our way back inland. The ride home felt lighter than the journey out, as if the air had lost some of its suffocating tension. We had not solved everything, but we had gained allies and knowledge. Perhaps that was the best we could hope for now. At Winterfell, Edric greeted us with urgent news. Thesantis had become more agitated in his cell, muttering about a moonlit awakening. He repeatedly demanded to see the sky. The guards refused, of course. He would either rant or grow silent for hours. Meanwhile, Maester Halleys had uncovered more details in his parchments. They described a ritual to awaken lesser drakes under the full moon, harnessing the power of certain constellations. Edric said that last night had been a full moon, and the guards reported hearing unearthly howls from his cell, though that might have been only Thesantis' voice. Father shared with Edric what we had learned from the Bravosi regarding Doratus. Edric's eyes flared with anger at the name. So Thesantis is an underling of this Doratus. They aim to gather an army of twisted dragons. We have to kill them at the source, or we'll always be swatting at the fringes. But the source is across the sea, I pointed out softly. We can't march an army to Essos. We can barely feed ourselves here after the war. Father sighed. Yes, we must be cautious. At least for now. Perhaps if the Bravosi, he broke off as a runner burst into the hall, panting, face pale. He brought dire news. Moat Caelan had sent word that a small band of strange figures was spotted near the neck, seemingly heading north. The Reeds, who patrolled the bogs, reported glimpses of men in silver-white cloaks. One apparently carried a staff shaped like a dragon's spine. More sorcerers? We shivered at the possibility. Edric slammed a fist on the table. It never ends. They keep slithering in, a handful at a time, sowing chaos. We have to root them out. Father rubbed his temples, exhaustion in his voice. We will. I'll send a raven to House Reed, instructing them to track these intruders. We'll mobilize a contingent from Winterfell to assist. I just returned, but it seems I must ride out again. Edric rose at once. No, let me go. Your injuries still pain you, though you hide it well. The neck can be treacherous. I'll take a force, coordinate with Reed, flush these vipers out. Father looked reluctant, but eventually assented, recognizing Edric's skill. Very well. Take who you need, but be wary. The neck is full of hidden dangers. Don't let them lure you into a trap. Edric flashed a tight smile. I won't. I'll bring a dozen huntsmen who know the swamps. We'll find them, or at least drive them away. He clasped Father's hand, then turned to me. Stay safe here, sister. We've seen how cunning these sorcerers can be. Keep watch over Thesantis. I nodded, tension swirling in my gut. Every time Edric rode away, I felt a pang of dread, recalling how close we'd come to losing him in the siege. But these were the burdens we carried now, the burdens we had chosen by defying the might of Valyria. The world was not done testing us. In the days after Edric departed, I threw myself into the ongoing tasks at Winterfell. Father and I refined the channels of communication with White Harbor and Bravos, dispatching coded letters. We integrated the new Scorpion designs into the ramparts, ensuring every tower had a vantage for anti-air defense, just in case. The clang of metal from the forge mingled with the whistling wind. Snow fell intermittently, though the approach of spring had softened the land somewhat. Meanwhile, Thesantis continued his sullen defiance, though occasionally he lapsed into near-mad rants, speaking of an unstoppable legion of half-formed dragons that would soon ravage Westeros. We took his words with caution, aware that fear might be his only weapon now. Yet some part of me found it all too plausible. If Doratus commanded a fortress in Essos, what was to stop him from sending more minions across the sea? Or perhaps from forging alliances with discontented lords in Westeros who might resent the Starks' rise in prestige? The possibilities gnawed at me. Then came the day that shook us anew. A raven arrived from the Dreadfort. The message was brief and chilling. A large mutated dragon, bigger than any we had yet seen, had been sighted near the lonely hills, incinerating a remote outpost. The Boltons requested aid, for they had lost 2 scouting parties to the beast. This was not the small, stunted creatures we had encountered. According to the few survivors, it possessed a broad wingspan. Though not as large as a Valyrian war dragon, it could still fly short distances, enough to make it a dire threat. Father's expression hardened. So it seems the infiltration goes beyond scattered sorcerers. One of these monstrosities is of significant size. If it can truly fly, the damage could be catastrophic. We wasted no time. Father gathered 100 men, among them scorpion crews and archers, then looked me in the eye. Branna, I need you here, in Winterfell, to coordinate communication. If this beast slips past us, it could strike anywhere. You must be ready to dispatch reinforcements. The lords must be put on alert. I bristled at being left behind yet again, but I recognized the necessity. Father had faced dragons once already, and he had the experience. I simply nodded, my voice tight. I'll do what must be done. With that, Father and his men rode out to meet with the Boltons, leaving me once more to the burden of waiting, of orchestrating ravens, of scanning the sky. The hours crept by. I tried to keep busy, drafting letters to the Manderleys, the Serwins, the Karstarks, urging vigilance. Every time I stepped into the courtyard, I glanced up, half expecting to see a winged shape overhead. By the second day, a gloom settled over me, the old memory of the siege returning in full force. We had killed full-grown dragons with cunning and luck, but the cost was high. Now we faced a new breed, possibly commanded by no one at all, an unpredictable horror. On the 4th day after Father's departure, a raven arrived. The words were from Lord Bolton himself. They had engaged the creature near the weeping water. Father had devised a trap, using scorpions hidden among rocky crags. A bolt had struck the beast's flank, forcing it to land. Men rushed in with spears, sustaining heavy casualties. The monster, wounded but enraged, tore through ranks of swordsmen with flaming breath. Father himself led a final charge, driving an oil-soaked spear into its chest. The beast toppled, spewing flame that incinerated half the men around him. Lord Bolton wrote that the victory was theirs, but at a terrible cost. Father was gravely burned, though alive, and many from both houses had fallen. The letter ended by saying Father would likely be carried back to Winterfell once they stabilized his wounds. A wave of relief and terror swept me. Father lived, but was he disfigured, crippled? The next days were a blur as I waited with mounting dread. At last, Father returned by wagon, escorted by a grim-faced column of men. I rushed out to meet them, my heart in my throat. Father lay on a pallet, swathed in bandages from his neck to his waist, patches of raw, blistered flesh visible where the wrappings did not cover. His face was set in a hard line, etched with pain. Maester Halleys hurried to tend him, carrying him to a prepared chamber. I followed, tears threatening to spill as I saw the extent of his injuries. But Father, through grit teeth, forced a reassuring nod. I yet live, daughter, he rasped. That monster is ended. It took the maester hours to treat him, applying ointments, changing bandages. I hovered near the door, hearing Father's occasional groans of agony. The smell of burned flesh and healing poultices mixed in the air. Finally, Halleys emerged, face pale. The burns are severe, but not immediately mortal if infection does not set in. He must rest. Keep him warm, feed him broth. He may not be able to stand for weeks, if not longer. I bowed my head, relief mingling with fear. Father, the Lord of Winterfell, was now laid low. This new threat had exacted a bloody price. If more such beasts existed, who would stand against them? Edric was in the neck, Father incapacitated. The entire realm of the North felt perched on the brink of chaos. That evening I visited Father's bedside. He was half delirious from pain and the milk of the poppy. Yet he gripped my hand, voice hoarse. Branna, you must lead, in my stead for now. Defend the North from these horrors. Tears burned my eyes. I will, Father. Rest. We'll see this through. His grip slackened as he sank back into drugged slumber. I left the room, heart heavy, and retreated to the godwood. There, under the pale moonlight, I knelt by the heart tree, struggling to compose myself. So much responsibility pressed upon my shoulders, feeding our people through the last of winter, maintaining vigilance for more mutated dragons or sorcerers, liaising with bravos, supporting Edric in the neck, protecting father as he recovered. My mind spun. I reminded myself that we had weathered worse, the full might of Valyria's legions, real war dragons scorching our walls. Yet somehow, the slow burn of this infiltration felt more insidious, more draining. The old gods, if they listened, gave no sign. The wind rustled the heart tree's leaves, the carved face gazing with silent empathy. When I returned to the great hall, I gathered our captains and the senior bannermen present in Winterfell. They looked at me expectantly. Some of them, older men, had always seen me as the Lord's clever daughter, helpful in negotiations but not a wartime leader. Now, they recognized I was all that stood in father's stead. I lifted my chin, forcing my voice steady. Father is gravely wounded. Until he recovers, we must unite our efforts. Edric is in the neck. We have no word yet on his success or return. Therefore, I will coordinate our defenses. Captain Weiler, intensify patrols. Lord Serwyn, ensure your men remain on alert for any sign of these flying beasts. We suspect only a few remain, but we cannot be certain. Maintain close contact via Raven. The moment anything is spotted, you'll warn the others. We'll converge swiftly, scorpions at the ready. Is that clear? They all agreed, some with grim expressions, some with determined nods. I then turned to the matter of supplies. We must also ensure the wounded from the Dreadfort campaign are cared for. Send word to the Boltons that we stand ready to receive any who need the Maester's aid. We are all Northmen, united in the struggle. That last line was intended to reassure them we would not let old rivalries fester. In times like these, we needed every sword. So began a tense phase in which I found myself effectively ruling Winterfell. Each morning, I visited Father's chamber. Hally's changed his bandages, sometimes wincing at the rawness of the wounds. Father's eyes burned with frustration. He loathed being bedridden, feeling the weight of duty crushing him. Yet the pain was too great for him to move about much. I did my best to keep him informed, reading him the letters that arrived by Raven, seeking his counsel when needed. But more and more I made decisions on my own. Over time, I sensed a grudging respect from the captains. They saw I did not hesitate to scramble our forces when a rumor flared, or to send a polite but firm reply when a lord complained about some burden of watchfulness. The war had taught me resilience, and father had long relied on my counsel. Now I carried that role further than ever. Amid these duties, Edric finally returned, riding in on a mud-spattered horse, stubble shadowing his jaw. Relief flooded me. "Did you find the intruders in the neck?" I asked. He dismounted, face grim. "Some, yes. They were definitely Valyrian sorcerers or their hirelings, searching for something in the swamps. We cornered them near a ruin, an old watchtower from the time of the first men. They had books, sketches, scribbles about runes in the stone. They fought fiercely. We lost men, but we drove them off. 2 escaped, diving into the bog. The reeds chased them, but the neck can hide 1,000 secrets. We recovered some of their notes, though." I sighed. One threat after another. Father is gravely burned. He slew a large mutated dragon near the lonely hills. Edric's eyes widened. "Gods! Is he?" "He lives," I said gently. "But we're not sure if he'll walk properly again. For now, I've been organizing our defenses." Edric nodded, a flicker of gratitude in his gaze. "Then you've do. Any what needs doing. Let's see father." I accompanied him to the chamber. Father stirred, face etched with pain, managed a wan smile at the sight of Edric. They clasped hands, though father's voice was weak. "The monster is dead," he said, as if he needed to reaffirm it. Edric exhaled. "You did well, father. We owe you much." Then a shadow passed across his features. But these sorcerers in the neck were after something. They spoke of runes in the old tower that might unseal the blood or some nonsense. I fear they're searching for any scrap of power to use against us. Father closed his eyes, exhaustion tugging at him. "The war continues, even if in the shadows. You and Branna must stand firm. The North must stand firm. We promised we would." In the days that followed, Edric and I pooled our knowledge, the scrolls we had seized, the notes from the swamp, the references to an artifact. Maester Hally's was overwhelmed, but he kept at it, gleaning bits of insight. He believed the Valyrians might be attempting to piece together a puzzle of ancient magic left behind by the children of the forest and the first men, blending it with their own draconic sorcery. The notion was terrifying, an unholy fusion of old and new powers. Still, we had no clear sign they had succeeded. The mutated dragons we had faced were lethal, but we had proven able to slay them. Perhaps their twisted nature left them weaker overall, smaller, more vulnerable to scorpion bolts. Our fear was that one day they might perfect their experiments, unleashing monstrous armies too large to contain. As Father slowly healed, he sometimes asked for Thesantis to be brought before him so he could question him personally. Each time, the mage sneered, hurling curses, refusing to speak. He was a husk of his former self, but his hatred burned bright. One morning, Father, propped against pillows, confronted him with the knowledge we had gleaned from Bravos, from the swamp notes, from the tower parchments. Thesantis's eyes flickered with barely concealed alarm at certain mentions, as if we were dangerously close to the truth. But still he kept silent or spat out lines about Daratus's unstoppable wrath. Eventually, Father sighed in disgust. He is too far gone in madness or fanaticism. We'll learn nothing more from him. We left Thesantis to rot in the dungeons, an unsettling reminder of the foreign malice that had seeped into our land. Spring broke more decisively at last, the snows melting, the streams flowing again. Life stirred in the fields, though the scars of war and monstrous attacks remained in every charred ruin. I oversaw the planting of new crops, wary of how precarious our stores might be if we faced a poor harvest. Edric took on the training of new recruits, determined to maintain a standing force capable of mobilizing quickly. Father, though still not well enough to don armor, insisted on walking with assistants around the courtyard, letting men see he was alive, forging a sense of unity. He wore a half-cape draped over his burned side, but beneath it, the bandages told the real story. Every step was pain, yet he endured. An undercurrent of anxiety never left us. We waited for the next crisis, the next monstrous sighting, the next infiltration. But as the days became weeks, a cautious calm prevailed. Reports of new beasts diminished. Perhaps we had slain the existing ones. The only real sign of continued Valyrian meddling came in the form of rumors from the western coasts. A few unmarked ships had tried landing on the stony beaches near Deepwood Motte, repelled by local defenders. Some said foreign tongues were heard cursing as the intruders fled. But no dragons. No war legion. During this lull, Father finally summoned the strength to call a grand council of all northern lords at Winterfell. He wanted them to see that House Stark had not been broken by the war or these new threats. I assisted in organizing the event, ensuring lodging and provisions for the many guests. Edric prepared the yard for demonstrations of scorpion tactics. On the appointed day, the lords arrived in procession, the Karstarks, the Glovers, the Umbers, the Boltons, the Manderleys, and all the rest. They gathered in the great hall, its walls newly repaired but still bearing faint scorch marks like a silent testament to the siege. Father sat at the high table, flanked by Edric and me. Though he bore the marks of his burns, he wore his dignity like armor. When the hall quieted, he spoke in a measured tone. Lords of the North, we have withstood the might of Valyria, repelled lesser attacks, and faced these cursed abominations that crawled from the minds of foreign sorcerers. But our vigilance must not waver. The North stands free because we unite when threatened. Let us do so again, for though the storms may recede, the horizon may hold new tempests. We must be ready always. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Lord Glover stood, praising Father's leadership. Lady Mormont spoke fiercely about safeguarding the coasts. Even the Boltons spoke in subdued respect. House Manderley recounted the progress in White Harbor. Each lord pledged men or resources to maintain a watchful posture against future invasions or monstrous incursions. The gloom of the hall lifted as we realized that, despite the horrors endured, the North remained strong and united. Afterward, Father beckoned me aside. Branna, you see now what we have forged. This unity did not exist in such strength before. The war with Valyria changed us, forced us to stand shoulder to shoulder. It cost us dear, but we survived. If the day comes that the Empire or its splinters invade again, we will not stand alone. I nodded, feeling a swell of hope. We have alliances with Bravos as well, Father. Perhaps we can keep the Freehold's ambitions at bay. He gave a guarded smile. Perhaps. In any case, you have been instrumental in holding this house together. I cannot say how proud I am. Emotion crept into my throat, but I only inclined my head, grateful. If there was one small victory, it was that Father was still with us, battered but unbroken, and that Edric and I had grown into roles neither of us had sought, but both had embraced. The war had tempered us like steel in the forge. As the lords dispersed, each returning to their domain, we spoke words of mutual resolve. Edric oversaw the final demonstration of scorpion loading in the courtyard, impressing many. Then, one by one, they departed, banners fluttering in the spring breeze. The North might not see peace in the sense of carefree days, but at least we had a respite, a chance to rebuild further and prepare for uncertain tomorrows. That night, I wandered the battlements alone. The moon bathed the stones in silver, the air carrying the smell of turned earth from the fields below. My mind flicked through all that had happened, the great siege, the fall of White Harbor, the dragons we had slain, the twisted monstrosities we had discovered, the infiltration of sorcerers seeking to sow chaos. I gazed up at the stars, recalling how small we were in the cosmic scale. Yet we had shown that even an empire can bleed, that dragons can die, that dark sorcery can be pushed back. If the future held new onslaughts, we would face them with the same northern grit. I thought of father, scarred but resolute, of Edric, forging forward with strength and cunning, of all the men and women who had given their lives so we might stand free. I thought of our tenuous alliances across the sea and the cunning manipulations that might lie ahead. But above all, I felt the heartbeat of the North beneath my feet. We might not be done with war. We might not be safe from the vengeful hands of Valyria or its splinter factions. But in this moment, under these ancient stars, Winterfell endured like a fortress of memory and will. And I, Branna Stark, though I never aspired to titles or thrones, found myself at the cusp of our house's uncertain destiny, ready to preserve what we had fought so fiercely to save. For if Valyria declared war on the North once more, if new dragons soared across our skies, we would answer as we always had, with unyielding defiance, with cunning that caught the flames in our fists, with the unity born of old tradition and sharpened by new adversity. We were the North and we did not kneel. That, at least, remained true through every trial, every heartbreak, every long night. We had endured the worst, and if more was to come, so be it. We would stand again, as we always had, and meet it on our feet, swords bared, hearts fierce. The wind keened softly over the battlements, a lullaby and a warning both. Winter was coming, yes, but we stood ready to guard our land and each other, come what may. A cold wind gusted across the battlements of Winterfell, stirring the torches that burned against the encroaching night. I stood at that familiar vantage, above the courtyard, beneath a wide net of stars, and closed my eyes, letting the chill graze my cheeks. So many nights I had stood here, thinking the worst was behind us, believing we had snatched victory from Valyria's jaws. But in truth, we had merely traded a single, grand cataclysm for a lurking tapestry of threats. Part of me missed the clarity of the siege, awful as it had been. Then we knew precisely where our enemy stood, at the gates, with dragons overhead. Now, our foes came in dribs and drabs, in secret infiltration, in twisted reptilian beasts that prowled the forests, in cryptic references to an artifact hidden somewhere in our ancient land. We had fought too hard to let despair win. But the weight was immense, and with my father wounded, the burden of leadership often fell to me. Not that I carried it alone. My brother Edric was newly returned from his expedition into the Neck, bringing with him a handful of tattered parchments seized from Valyrian infiltrators. My father, Lord Torrhen Stark, though still recovering from his burns, insisted on hearing every detail of those documents. Each day he improved a little. He could walk a short distance on his own now, even though he needed bandages changed daily. The scarring on his left side remained severe, deep welts that reddened whenever he strained himself. I feared he would never again move with the fluid strength he once had, but even so, every time I saw him hobble around the courtyard, I marveled at his stubborn fortitude. Edric, too, had changed. He had always been strong, quick to laugh, easy with a jest, but in the wake of these constant battles, lines of worry marked his brow. He had watched men devoured by twisted drakes in the eastern hills. He had fought Valyrian sorcerers in the swamps. Now a different sort of hardness glinted in his gaze. Still, he kept his spirit, greeting old friends with strong embraces, bantering with the guards as if we were not teetering on the brink of some new disaster. He was like the sun-piercing storm clouds, his optimism always found a way to shine through, even if it was a battered sword of hope. I turned from the wall, inhaling the crisp air. It was nearing midnight, yet I knew I would not sleep. Whenever I closed my eyes, I saw flickers of flame, the monstrous shape of that stunted dragon we had slain near Long Lake, or the bigger beast that nearly killed my father. I thought of the cryptic references to the casket of living flame, some object of rumored power that Valyrian mages might seek. Was it real or a fable? Why had the Santis babbled about it, and why had the men in the Neck been scouring old watchtowers for runes? An unease lodged in my belly, the sense that we were dancing at the edge of a precipice. I made my way down the stairs, across the courtyard, past the weirwood where moonlight silvered the white bark. A few drifting flakes of snow sparkled in the torchlight. In the keep's corridor, I could smell the lingering aroma of bread from the kitchens, some comfort to offset the late hour. I headed toward the library, hoping that among our records I might find some scrap of insight. Maester Halleys had already scoured the shelves, but perhaps a fresh look would yield something new. We needed any edge. To my surprise, I found Edric there, hunched over a table. A solitary candle flickered, sending shadows dancing across rows of leather-bound tomes. He had removed his cloak, revealing the sinewy muscles of his arms beneath a simple wool tunic. Sweat glistened at his temples as though he had been poring over manuscripts for hours. At my approach, he glanced up and mustered a small grin. "Couldn't sleep either, sister?" he asked. I shook my head and joined him at the table, eyeing the scroll he had opened. The same old nightmares, I admitted quietly. And father was restless earlier. The bandages irritate him. Edric's grin faded. He tries to pretend he's unbothered, but I see him wince when he thinks no one is looking. I sighed, placing a hand gently on the worn parchment in front of him. "What are you reading?" He leaned back, rolling his shoulders. "One of Halleys's translations of the papers we took off those sorcerers in the neck. It's incomplete, parts of it are too damaged to make sense, but it mentions a place called the Black Blood September, some ancient ruin that might date back to the Age of Heroes." He tapped a line of spidery script. The sorcerers used the word gateway. Could be figurative or might be literal. It's tied to that casket of living flame we keep hearing about. The text says, "In the halls of the Black Blood, the living flame shall be fed. The watchers in the ice cannot bar our way forever." I felt a chill at the words. The watchers in the ice. They keep saying that phrase too. Father thinks it might refer to the wall, but the entire north is a tapestry of ice. It could mean something else. Possibly. Or maybe it's a reference to the old prophecy about the long night, the idea that watchers guard the realm from darkness. But these Valyrian texts twist everything. He rapped his knuckles on the table. I wish we could find someone who actually knows these references. I hesitated. We do have the Santis in our dungeons, though I doubt we'll glean anything more from him. He's refused every form of questioning. Edric's jaw tightened. We could try more drastic measures. Father balks at the idea of torture, but if the entire realm is threatened. I laid a hand on his forearm. No. I can't say I'd rule it out entirely, but there must be another way. We might glean more from these texts or from our Bravosi contacts. Let's not stoop to his savage ways unless we have no choice. He exhaled, relaxing slightly. You're right, as usual. But I hate the feeling that we're playing blind. Every time we turn around, these sorcerers scuttle around like spiders in the dark. His metaphor captured my own sense of creeping dread. I pored over the lines again. The watchers in the ice cannot bar our way forever. Perhaps the sorcerers believed something or someone guarded this rumored artifact. But who? I thought of the children of the forest, that half-mythic race said to dwell in hidden groves. It had been centuries since sightings were recorded. Was that the Watchers? Or was it just a fancy name for the Order of the Night's Watch? My mind spun in circles. In the end, we found no immediate clarity. Weariness weighed on us, so we parted ways, Edric stumbling off to a few hours of rest while I returned to my chamber. Outside my window, the moon hung low as though it shared our watch. Morning came too soon, bringing the bustle of day-to-day tasks. Father was to meet with several minor lords who had come from the west with petitions about border disputes. Though he was still bedridden much of the time, he insisted on receiving them in his solar, propped by cushions. I joined him, presenting a calm face despite my exhaustion. The lords expressed frustration over farmers raiding each other's land for meager winter stores. Normally, such matters were trifling, easily handled by local justiciars, but these men were terrified, fearful that hunger or some new monstrous incursion would devastate them. Father listened gravely, offering solutions that balanced fairness and severity while I jotted notes for follow-up. My father's voice wavered at times, he tired easily, but the lords left with relief. They saw that House Stark's leadership remained intact. After they departed, Father sagged back against the cushions. I poured him water, but he shook his head. "I'm well, only weary," he rasped. "Branna, you have more pressing tasks than listening to old men bicker about boundary lines." "Nothing is more pressing if it helps keep the realm calm," I said gently, though I understood his meaning. He gave a wan smile. "You truly have your mother's spirit. She used to say that a single feud, if left to fester, could distract us from far greater threats. We mustn't let petty disputes fracture the north." I squeezed his hand, warmed by his confidence. "I'll see them resolved." "Rest, Father." I wanted him to regain strength, though the deep burns took a toll that potions and poultices could only ease, not eliminate. I left him in the care of Maester Halleys and the steward, striding through corridors alive with daily hustle. Along the way, I ran into a young messenger from White Harbor, newly arrived on horseback. He bowed, presenting me with a sealed letter. Recognizing the Manderley crest, I hurried to the library and broke the seal. The letter, penned by Lord Wireless Manderley, contained news that unsettled me. Rumors in the port suggested that certain foreign ships had docked in a small cove near Sisterton, landing a handful of passengers who spoke with an eastern accent. Fisherfolk reported seeing suspicious activity at night, lights on the beach that quickly vanished at dawn. The Manderleys had dispatched men to investigate, but the strangers were gone by the time they arrived. Lord Wireless concluded that this might be more infiltration. He recommended that House Stark keep watch on the Sisterton route as well as the area around the Bight. I rubbed my temples, frustration coiling. Another infiltration route. We had hammered the neck, we had scoured the Wolf's Wood, but the entire coastline was porous, especially if the Valyrians had gold to bribe local fishermen. I penned a quick response, urging Lord Manderley to stay vigilant and promising to send a small band of our men to coordinate with Sisterton's local officials. Then I hurried to Edric, who was in the training yard drilling recruits. He turned as I approached, sweat-slick hair clinging to his brow. "Sisterton," he said after I explained. "Damn it all, they're like roaches creeping in where we least expect." "Precisely. We need to contain them. If these landings continue, we might face the same problem we had with Thesantis, some new sorcerer setting up secret experiments." He nodded curtly, then cast his gaze over the dusty yard where men practiced archery. "I'll dispatch a squad. I can't go myself, I'm due to ride west soon to reassure the minor lords about that new border arrangement. But I'll pick a seasoned officer to command." I hesitated, then said, "I'll go." Edric blinked. "You?" "I haven't left Winterfell in weeks. Since Father's injuries, I've mostly managed affairs here. But the realm is large, and I can't let you and Father shoulder every journey. Besides, I've led men before, remember the Wolfswood skirmish?" His lips twisted thoughtfully. "I remember. And you handled it well. But Father needs rest," I said firmly. "We can't let him keep traveling. And you're needed to address the border matter. If infiltration is happening via Sisterton or near the sisters, someone with authority must go to coordinate it the locals. Let me do this. I'll be careful." He studied me a moment, then gave a slow nod. "All right. I'll send Captain Weiler with you, he's capable and you know each other well. Take enough men to handle any threat." "Thank you," I said softly, relieved. It would be a short journey, likely, but after so many tense days at Winterfell, I felt oddly eager to act. At least out in the field, I could put my restlessness to use. We assembled the force in short order, a detachment of 20 skilled riders plus another dozen men on foot, with 2 pack horses carrying scorpion bolts and a collapsible scorpion, just in case we encountered a large threat. The memory of the twisted beasts still loomed in my mind. Father, hearing of my plan, expressed concern from his sickbed, but he did not forbid it. He only made me promise caution. And so, on a brisk morning streaked with pale sunshine, we set off from Winterfell, the clink of bridles punctuating the hush. Our route skirted northeast, aiming for the coastal road that led towards Sisterton. Though the sisters themselves were islands off the coast, the immediate region around the mouth of the White Knife had inlets and coves that could hide small ships. With Valyrian infiltration in mind, we intended to investigate any suspicious activity. That first day, we rode in relative peace, passing farmland that was just beginning to show green shoots. Spring had truly arrived. Birds sang in the hedges, and for a moment, I could almost imagine a world without dragons or war. But then we crossed a stream, and I noticed burn marks on a leaning willow, evidence of a previous fight, or else some travelers making ill use of fire. The land still bore scars. Captain Weiler, riding at my side, asked how my father fared. I offered what reassurance I could, though the truth was that Father's convalescence had no certain end. Weiler nodded gravely, remarking that the men admired his tenacity. Then he shifted topics, discreetly inquiring whether we might indeed face another wave of lesser dragons. I shook my head, trying to sound confident. "We've seen no sign of that in weeks. The threat remains, but I suspect we slew most that were active in our lands." He acknowledged that with relief, though an undercurrent of tension lingered in his eyes. Like most who had survived the siege, he understood how swiftly dragons, even stunted ones, could wreak havoc. We made camp that evening under an old oak near a bend in the road, posting double watches. I stared into the small fire, recalling the last time I'd led a group on such a mission. That had been the Wolfswood with sightings of Valyrian stragglers. Back then, everything had felt new and terrifying to me. Now I was more accustomed to danger. Yet some part of me mourned that I had grown used to it. Dawn found us back in the saddle. The terrain changed as we approached the coast, the ground turning sandy in places, the air carrying a briny tang. Gull cries replaced the hush of wind in the trees. By midday we reached the outskirts of Sisterton's territory. It was not a large settlement, but the keep perched on a rocky rise overlooking the sea. Fisherfolk huts clustered near the shore, nets draped over drying racks, simple boats bobbing in the cove. I could see how easy it would be for a foreign galley to slip in at night, especially if the watch was lax. We were greeted by the local bailiff, a stout man named Bourne, who apologized for the absence of the local knight. Sir Martin Sisterton had fallen ill. Bourne led us to the modest hall where I presented the crest of House Stark and explained our purpose. The bailiff seemed uneasy but anxious to help. He had heard rumors, yes, of strangers on the beach at night, but the fisherfolk were secretive at the best of times. Some might smuggle contraband to avoid taxes. When I pressed him about Valyrian speech, he hesitated. I've heard whispers, my lady. People claimed they heard an odd accent, sharp and fluid like the tongue from across the sea. But I haven't witnessed it myself. I asked if there were any fresh tracks or a particular cove they might favor. Bourne nodded. There's a spot 2 miles south, near a rocky spit called the Widow's Hook. Local gossip says it's haunted, so people avoid it. Perfect place for smugglers or, well, for worse. He swallowed nervously. Captain Weiler and I exchanged a look. We'll search that area, I told Bourne, and see if we find evidence. Meanwhile, keep an eye on your coastline. If you spot suspicious ships, send a rider to us at once. He swore he would. With that, we left half our men to rest in Sisterton and took the other half riding out along the beach toward Widow's Hook. The day was gray and overcast, the tide low, revealing broad swaths of wet sand. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries strangely mournful. The wind whipped my hair, carrying a tang of salt and seaweed. I found the seascape oddly beautiful if lonely. We followed the rocky shoreline until we came upon a narrow path that led up a small ridge. The locals' name for the place became obvious when I saw a huge, jagged rock formation jutting over the water, resembling a bent hook or scythe. Bits of old netting and driftwood littered the shallows as though cast ashore by storms. I saw no immediate sign of life, but we dismounted, leading our horses carefully over the slippery stones. The men spread out searching for footprints or any sign of a recent camp. One man called out, "Tracks here, though partially washed away by the tide." Another pointed to a blackened patch of sand. On closer inspection, we found a ring of stones that might have formed a small fire pit. Within the circle lay charred scraps of cloth, giving off a faint chemical odor. I crouched beside it, frowning. Captain Weiler sniffed the air and made a face. "That's not ordinary wood ash. Smells like they burned something soaked in oil. Possibly to conceal their presence or to signal a ship." As we examined the site, a gull's cry rose behind us. I turned to see one of our scouts hurrying forward. "My lady, we found something wedged in a crevice of rock." He extended a piece of metal, broken at the end, shaped like a stylized dragon's claw. My heart gave a swift jolt. It resembled a portion of that strange alloy the Valyrians used for ornamental weapons or amulets. Captain Weiler turned it over, cursing softly. "This is definitely not local. So they were here. Perhaps they left in a hurry." I stared at the waves lapping the hook, feeling a surge of frustration. We were always a step behind. If a Valyrian infiltration cell had landed here, they might already be gone, or they might be holed up somewhere inland. Another scrap of cloth near the ashes bore faint red thread, maybe from an Eastern-style robe. There was no sign of how many people or where they might have gone. We scoured the beach until dusk, finding only more footprints leading up the rocky slope. At the top, near a scraggly cluster of gorse bushes, we discovered a half-eaten meal. Dried fish and unleavened bread, left behind. Footprints headed inland, but the ground was rocky, and the tracks soon vanished. We concluded that a small band, maybe 4 or 5, had come ashore recently, built a hidden fire, and then moved inland. Whether they were mere scouts or sorcerers, we did not know. With the light fading, we set up a watchful camp near the hook, hoping they might return. That night was tense and cold. The tide came in with a roar, waves crashing against the jagged rocks. I lay in my tent, listening to the wind. The men on watch patrolled the darkness, torches flickering. I drifted into a light, uneasy doze, only to jolt awake when I heard a hiss of steel and a muffled shout. Heart hammering, I scrambled up, sword in hand, nearly colliding with Captain Weiler outside my tent flap. "What is it?" I asked, breath steaming. He looked grim. One of our sentries glimpsed a figure on the ridge. He challenged them, but they vanished. No sign of an attack, though. We quickly organized a search, but found nothing. If someone had been spying on us, they were long gone. After that, the men remained doubly vigilant, but no other incidents occurred before dawn. In the early light, we conferred on our next step. We could keep searching the coastal area or track inland. Sisterton itself was behind us, but the roads from here led toward the northern moors and eventually to more remote farmland. If the newcomers intended to hide from us, they would likely avoid major settlements. I decided we would search inland for a day or two. If we found nothing, we would return to Sisterton and coordinate with the bailiff for a wider net. We broke camp and rode inland, scanning every hill and sparse copse. Midway through the morning, one of our outriders spotted a column of smoke in the distance. We spurred our horses, suspecting a farmstead. But when we arrived, we found only a ruin, a single barn, half burned to the ground, black smoke drifting from its remains. No people, no livestock in sight. A few charred goat carcasses. The stench made my stomach twist. Signs of some brief struggle lay in the trampled grass, blood, boot prints. Captain Weiler crouched by a smoldering plank. "This fire's recent. Must have happened last night." My throat went dry. "Are there survivors?" We spread out searching the area. No sign of the farmer or his family, no bodies either. Perhaps they had been taken or fled. I found a puddle of congealed blood near the barn door. Something or someone had bled heavily. Then we found another bit of that red-threaded cloth snagged on a splintered post. My pulse quickened. The infiltration had turned violent, and we were only hours behind them. As we fanned out to search, I noticed something that made my heart lurch, a scorch pattern on the ground that looked suspiciously like the remnants of draconic flame. Yet it was not as large as the blasts we had seen from the bigger beasts. Could it be that these infiltrators had a smaller mutated drake with them? Or perhaps they had used some kind of alchemical fire. My mind whirled, recalling the foul mixture Thesantis used in his lab. A fresh shout rang out, "Over here!" Rushing around the corner of the ruined barn, we found one of our men supporting a terrified young boy who had been hiding under a collapsed haystack. The child trembled uncontrollably, too frightened to speak at first. I knelt beside him, gently wiping soot from his cheek. "It's all right," I murmured. "We're from Winterfell. You're safe now." He stared at me with tear-filled eyes, then sobbed, clinging to my cloak. Eventually, he managed to whisper, They took my pa and burned the barn, wore strange clothes, carrying something like a lizard on a chain." My worst fears confirmed, a drake or some twisted cousin of a dragon in the hands of these Valyrian infiltrators. "How many men?" I asked. 4 or 5, maybe more. They had covered faces, except one with silver hair. I ran and hid. I offered what little comfort I could, then signaled Captain Weiler. We had to track them before they vanished deeper into the wilderness. But the boy needed shelter. We sent 2 men back with him towards Sisterton, instructing them to warn the bailiff of what had happened. Meanwhile, the rest of us prepared for pursuit. The tracks were faint but discernible, heading north across rolling fields and low ridges. Now we pressed hard, guided by the occasional scorched patch of grass or droplet of blood. My adrenaline spiked at the thought that they might have a captive farmer, or multiple. If we did not hurry, they could vanish like so many others. By late afternoon, we came upon a narrow ravine with scrubby vegetation. Our trackers indicated that whoever we pursued had likely descended into it. We tied our horses above and proceeded on foot, mindful of ambush. The sky was still overcast, casting a milky light across the rocks. My pulse pounded as we ventured deeper, weapons ready. We found them, or rather, they found us. A crossbow bolt whistled past my ear, thudding into a rock. "Down!" Weiler yelled, and we dropped, shields up, scrambling for cover behind boulders. From the eastern slope, I heard shouts in an unfamiliar accent. Another bolt ricocheted off stone. Our archers peered out and returned fire. I glimpsed a silver-haired figure hunched behind a stunted tree, wearing dark leathers. Next to him crouched another in a hooded cloak, quickly reloading a crossbow. Further uphill, a third man hovered near something that snarled and snapped, a squat reptilian shape with a ridged spine. The chain glinted in the gloom. My stomach nodded. A brief exchange of missile fire followed. One of our men took a bolt in the arm, but we managed to put an arrow through the crossbowman's throat. He toppled with a strangled cry. Then the silver-haired leader barked something in that clipped Valyrian speech, yanking the chain. The small drake, half the size of a horse, scrambled forward, exhaling a short gout of flame that scorched the scrub. Our men recoiled, but Wyler shouted for the crossbow teams to focus on the beast. Twang, one bolt struck its flank, drawing a screech. Another soared wide. I clenched my teeth, remembering all too well how dangerous these things could be, even in smaller form. The silver-haired man advanced, brandishing a curved blade that glimmered with the same pale metal. Two of his companions joined him, forming a wedge as they darted between rocks. Our archers shifted aim, but the terrain gave them cover. I cursed quietly. We could not let them slip around us or unleash the drake at close range. "Form ranks," I called, stepping behind a pair of our spearmen. I carried a sword at my hip, though I was no expert in melee. Wyler signaled the rest of the men to spread out. Another volley of arrows forced the Valyrians to hesitate, but the drake scurried along the ravine's slope, spitting flame in short spurts. Smoke drifted upward, stinging our eyes. Suddenly, I spotted movement behind a boulder to our left. Another Valyrian, creeping along the rocks, ready to flank us. "Left side," I shouted. One of our spearmen pivoted, thrusting. Steel clashed. The infiltrator countered, sending sparks flying. Our man staggered. I drew my sword, rushing to aid him. The Valyrian whirled on me, eyes gleaming with hate. He lunged, blade whistling. My heart thundered as I barely blocked, the impact jarring my arms. He was strong, trained. With a snarl, he pressed in. I stumbled, but the spearman recovered and stabbed him from behind, the spear point erupting through his chest. The man choked, dropping. I exhaled a ragged breath, thanking the old gods for the timely rescue. No time to dwell. The drake unleashed another gust of flame, forcing 3 of our men to dive behind cover. One crawled away, cloak on fire. Wyler dashed across open ground, waving for the scorpion team. Yes, we had brought a small, collapsible scorpion in case of draconic threat, though we never expected to need it so soon. 2 men scrambled to set it up behind a rock, frantically assembling the crossarms. I saw the silver-haired leader notice them. He shouted an urgent command. The drake bounded toward them, hissing, maw gaping with flickers of orange. Our archers tried to distract it, loosing arrows that glanced off its scaled hide. It spat flame, engulfing one of the men in a swirl of fire. Screams tore the air. Rage flashed inside me. I forced my legs to move, sprinting to the scorpion. The second man, trembling and singed, still tried to load a bolt the size of my forearm. Quickly, I hissed, helping him slot it into place. The drake whirled, preparing another flaming breath. My limbs shook as I guided the scorpion's swivel, taking aim. The beast sprang forward and we fired. The bolt flew, streaking low, and struck the drake's chest near its forelimb. A wet crunch, a plume of blackish blood. It reeled with a tortured shriek. Seizing the chance, our archers peppered it with arrows. It thrashed, tail sweeping, and collapsed in the dust, letting out a final rasp. Relief warred with horror, another twisted creation dead, but the carnage all around hammered home the cost. A wave of rancid smoke wafted from the drake's wound. At that moment, the silver-haired leader roared in anger and leapt from cover. He charged the scorpion. I had no time to reload. I drew my sword again, bracing for the worst. But Wyler barreled into him from the side, knocking him off balance. They grappled, exchanging furious blows. The silver-haired man was quick as a serpent, unleashing a flurry of strikes. Wyler parried with skill, yet the Valyrian's blade nicked his arm. Grimacing, Wyler bashed him with a shield. The man staggered, sneering, then lunged again. Their weapons clanged, echoing in the ravine. I dashed forward to assist. The Valyrian, seeing me, spun and tried to slash at my legs, but Wyler slammed him aside. I slashed at his flank, though my blow was clumsy. He twisted, the blade only slicing cloth. Then Wyler smashed him across the jaw with the shield rim. He crumpled, stunned. In a heartbeat, we were on him, kicking away his sword. He spat blood, eyes blazing with defiance. Around us, the other infiltrators lay dead or dying, save for one who fled along the ravine's lip. An arrow found his back, sending him tumbling out of sight. The entire skirmish had lasted only minutes, yet my lungs burned and the acrid smell of blood and flame choked the air. We had one prisoner, this silver-haired man, presumably their leader. While the men secured him, I rushed around to check on our wounded. We had lost 3 men outright, their bodies charred or cut down. 2 more were badly burned. Others bore lesser injuries. The cost of victory tasted bitter, but if we had not caught them now, who knew how many more lives they would have claimed. Wyler, panting and sporting a gash on his forearm, wiped his brow and sank to a crouch beside me. "We have him, my lady," he said, nodding at the unconscious Valyrian. "He's alive for now. Want to question him before we cart him back to Winterfell?" "Yes," I said, my breath ragged. "But we must first see if they had any captives." I recalled the boy's father. Check the ravine, the surrounding area. They might have hidden someone or worse. A search soon revealed a chilling discovery. A small overhang deeper in the ravine, partially screened by boulders. There we found 2 bound prisoners, a middle-aged man who matched the boy's description of his father, and a woman we didn't recognize. Both were bruised and dehydrated, but alive. They had been gagged and left under guard by one of the Valyrian infiltrators, who now lay among the dead. Gratitude lit the man's eyes when we cut his bonds. The woman wept silently with relief. They had no idea why they were taken, only that the intruders threatened them with a fire lizard if they did not cooperate. My stomach turned. Perhaps they had intended to sacrifice them or interrogate them about local knowledge. In any case, we had arrived in time. With the immediate threats neutralized, we secured the ravine. The men gathered the enemy bodies, searching for documents or clues. We found a small satchel containing rolled parchments in that same high Valyrian scrawl, plus some vials of noxious liquid that smelled of alchemical mixture. Among the dead, one wore a medallion shaped like a dragon's skull. Another carried knives of that pale metal. When we felt certain there were no more lurking foes, we returned to the living prisoner. He had regained consciousness, hands bound behind his back, staring at us with undisguised loathing. I stepped forward, mindful of the men arrayed protectively around me. "You command these infiltrators. Why have you here? What do you want in the north?" He spat on the ground, refusing to answer. Wyler smacked him across the face with the back of his gauntlet, not hard enough to kill, but enough to stun. "Answer the Lady Stark," he growled. A sneer curled the Valyrian's lip. Blood stained his chin from a cut on his mouth. "Lady Stark," he repeated mockingly. "You Starks are all the same, your line will drown in fire soon enough." I felt anger pulse in my veins, but I forced myself to remain controlled. "Your last attempt to drown us in fire failed at Winterfell. We killed the High Magus and half your dragons. Now you skulk about in small bands. For what purpose?" He snarled. "You know nothing. We are the chosen scions of Valyria, the true keepers of the flame. You may think you've won, but you've only stoked the embers of vengeance. Doratus will Doratus," I cut in, heart-pounding at the name. "He's the one orchestrating these abominations?" The prisoner's eyes blazed, then he forced a cold laugh. "Orchestrating? You have no idea the scope of his vision. He is the rightful heir of the Fire Throne, the one who will usher Valyria to a new age. Your land is but a stepping stone. Laugh at the notion if you like, but the black blood is stirring." "The black blood?" I repeated, remembering the references in the parchments. The man's sneer widened, but he went silent. I pressed further. "What is it? A place or a person?" He said nothing more, no matter how we threatened or coaxed. It seemed he had the same fanatical devotion as the Santas. Captain Wyler scowled. "We should bring him back to Winterfell with those parchments. Maybe Halleys can glean more. Or if the Lord deems it necessary, we might force answers from him." I looked at the battered men around us, the exhausted faces, the freed captives trembling from their ordeal. My heart felt heavy, but we had little choice. We needed every scrap of knowledge about these infiltration groups. The nod I gave was curt and final. We returned to Sisterton with the survivors, bury our dead, and then see this man locked in the strongest cell we can find. Carrying our wounded and the traumatized captives, we made our way slowly back to Sisterton. By the time we arrived, night had fallen. The bailiff was astounded at our news, though relieved that we had ended the immediate threat. We spent a day in Sisterton, allowing the wounded to rest and leaving behind a small group of men to watch the coast. Then we rode for Winterfell, taking our grim prisoner and the parchments. Our mood was subdued, but I felt a certain fierce satisfaction that at least one infiltration ring was stamped out. It took nearly a week to reach Winterfell, traveling slower than usual. The prisoner ate grudgingly, casting hateful glares at us. The rescued farmer and woman rode in our midst, bound for safer lodging near Winterfell until we could see them properly settled. On the last leg of the journey, as the great walls of home loomed into view, I wondered how Father would react. Another infiltration group, another twisted Drake slain, more cryptic references to Doratus and the Blablood. Would it ever end? Inside the yard, Edric was there to greet us, relief flooding his face at my safe return. I dismounted wearily, handing my reins to a stable hand. Edric gave me a brisk hug, then peered at the battered men behind me. You look like you've been through the wars again. I sighed, pointing to the bound Valyrian prisoner who had been hauled off a horse and forced to his knees. In a sense, we have. This is their leader. He wouldn't give us his name. We found another twisted Drake with them. Wyler set up the Scorpion in time to kill it, but we lost men. Edric nodded grimly. At least you survived. Come, let's see Father. I've updates too, and none are good news. My heart sank. It never ended. Still, I steeled myself and followed him. We left the prisoner to the guard's care. They dragged him off to a secure cell. Father awaited us in his solar, propped on cushions. The lines of pain on his face had eased slightly, but he still looked drawn. He beckoned me close. Daughter, I heard you engaged more Valyrian interlopers. Yes, I said, describing the battle. We captured their leader alive, Father. He mentioned Doratus and something called the Black Blood again. We brought parchments. I placed them on the table. Maester Halleys must decipher them. Father glanced at them as Edric quietly added, I've had a new raven from Bravos. They confirmed that multiple Valyrian factions remain at odds, but they've heard that Doratus has consolidated power in certain strongholds on Essos' western coast. They're calling his group the Circle of the Sixth Flame. Some rumors suggest he wants to cross the Narrow Sea again, larger scale than these infiltration teams. A hush fell. Father closed his eyes for a long moment. I feared as much. The North can hardly withstand another grand invasion. Not so soon, not while we're still rebuilding. And if they're perfecting these lesser drakes, they may come at us with an army of them. I leaned over the table, voice low. We have one advantage, time. If they are still consolidating power in Essos, they can't launch a full invasion tomorrow. Bravos might also hamper them. But these infiltration groups, maybe they're searching for ways to weaken us first. Or for that artifact they keep alluding to. Edric nodded. Which begs the question, do we keep playing defense here, or do we strike at them in Essos somehow? That seems impossible. We don't have the ships or the men or the goal to hire an army across the sea. Father's lips drew into a thin line. Perhaps we cannot fight them there, but we can gather allies or at least build a coalition to hold them at bay. Bravos, Pentos, perhaps even some southern lords in Westeros who want to avoid Valyrian dominion. The Targaryens on Dragonstone are rumored to have parted ways with the Freehold. Could they be an ally? Or are they just another Valyrian family with their own designs? He let out a weary sigh. We face a labyrinth. But we cannot simply wait for the hammer to fall. I remembered the Bravosi Magister's talk of exchanging intelligence. We could approach Bravos again, Father. Send an envoy to see if a combined effort is possible. Or at least to keep better tabs on Doratus's movements. He nodded. We must. But who to send? His gaze flicked to Edric, then to me. I cannot travel so far in my condition. Edric is needed here to ensure our defenses remain strong. That leaves you, Brenna. I blinked, heart pounding. Me? Across the Narrow Sea. Why not? Edric said, half smiling. You've proven your ability in negotiations and gleaning information. Bravos already respects your counsel from the letters you've exchanged. If Father writes formal letters of introduction, they would receive you well. You can assess the situation, speak to potential allies, and return with whatever intelligence or alliances we can forge. The notion was staggering. I had never traveled beyond the north, let alone across the sea. Yet I saw the logic. If Valyria threatened us again, we needed broader alliances. If you both believe this is wise, I won't shirk from it. But Father, your health. He lifted a scarred hand. I'm improving daily. Edric is here, along with our bannermen. They can manage. We have a new system of watchers at every major approach. Another infiltration attempt would not catch us unprepared, especially since you've removed that group near Sister Dun. Edric gripped my shoulder. We'll manage, sister. You do this. I'll keep Father safe. You keep the North safe by forging alliances abroad. My pulse was a storm of nerves and excitement. All right, I said softly. If it protects the realm, I'll go. Father gave a small, pained smile. We'll draft the letters, prepare a suitable retinue. You must have guards, a translator, perhaps. It won't be an easy voyage. Part of me felt relief at the idea of action. Another part quailed at the unknown. But that night, as I lay in bed, I resolved that we had come too far to let fear paralyze us. If traveling to Bravos might avert an even greater war, I would do it. The next days were a whirlwind of preparations. Maester Halley's work to decode the parchments we had seized. He found more references to the Black Blood September, though it remained unclear whether it lay in Westeros or Essos. Possibly both. The prisoner we captured proved as defiant as the Santis, refusing to speak beyond mocking curses. Our options for interrogation were limited without stooping to cruelty. Father decided to keep him locked away with guards to watch for any sign of sorcery. Meanwhile, Father drafted letters to the Sea Lord of Bravos to the magisters who had corresponded with us, stating that House Stark was sending an emissary, me, to discuss intelligence on Doratus and the Circle of the Sixth Flame. Edric organized a modest entourage for me, Captain Weiler, who insisted he would see me safely to Bravos and back, plus half a dozen guards, a squire, and a steward. We would also have a translator, an older Bravosi-speaking man named Gadden who had once traveled on merchant ships. The plan was to sail from White Harbor once the ice receded enough for a safe voyage. The night before my departure, I sat with Father in his solar while Edric stood by the window. The hush of late twilight filled the room. Father's voice was soft. "Daughter, I know you have the mind for diplomacy. But be wary. Bravos plays its own game. They might help us or they might use us. If there's a chance to glean how Doratus recruits these sorcerers and obtains resources for twisted beasts, seize it. We must understand the shape of the threat." I swallowed. "I'll do everything I can, Father." His gaze lingered on me, full of paternal concern. "I wish your mother could see how you've grown. She always said you would be the heart of this family one day." My throat tightened. "I wish she were here." Edric set a hand gently on my shoulder. "We'll make her proud and keep each other safe." At dawn, we rode for White Harbor. Edric accompanied me for the first day, then turned back, leaving me with my retinue to finish the journey. We passed farmland and small towns that still carried scars of war, but I noted with cautious hope that people had begun to rebuild. Soot-stained walls were patched, fields reseeded, families re-establishing routines. The North endured, as we always said. Upon reaching White Harbor, Lord Wylis Manderley welcomed us warmly. The harbor was busier than I had seen in many months, ships from the free cities, from the south, all engaged in vibrant trade. We discovered that the Bravosi vessel prepared for us was the Silver Heron, a sleek galley commanded by a captain of half-Bravosi lineage who had done business with the Manderleys for years. Lord Wylis confided that he trusted this captain enough to ferry me safely and discreetly. A day later, I found myself standing on the dock, gazing at the ship's hull as gulls screeched overhead. My breath snagged with nerves. I had never been more than a few miles out to sea. Now I would cross the entire narrow sea to a foreign city known for canals and masked courtesans, for bankers and bravos with slender swords. Captain Weiler, similarly uneasy, assured me we would be vigilant, especially in waters where pirates or Valyrian sympathizers might lurk. With final goodbyes to Lord Manderley, I boarded the Silver Heron. Sailors hoisted crates of provisions and we set off. White Harbor's walls receded behind us, replaced by the wide green-gray ocean. I stood at the prow, cloak whipping in the salt wind, refusing to let fear overshadow my sense of purpose. House Stark had bled to remain free of Valyrian chains. If forging alliances overseas might prevent another cataclysm, I would not falter. The voyage took weeks, made longer by unpredictable winds and the ship's need to avoid certain notorious pirate lanes. The crew, though polite, mostly kept to themselves. Gadden, our translator, helped me learn a few Bravosi phrases. Captain Weiler maintained a rotation of watchful guards on deck, scanning the horizon day and night. We spotted no obvious threats, though once we passed a distant silhouette of a galley flying a strange sigil, something with a stylized dragon or serpent. It kept its distance and we sailed on unmolested. The crossing taxed me more than I expected. I'd lived my life among the wide, solid expanses of the north, not cramped on a rolling deck. The first days I felt seasick, though I tried to hide it. Gradually, I found my sea legs and even learned to appreciate the dawn light shimmering over endless water. Sometimes, as the days stretched, my mind wandered to Father, to Edric, to the men and women rebuilding burned farms. Doubt plagued me, could I truly secure a grand alliance or glean vital secrets? But there was no turning back. At last, the hazy shape of Essos rose from the eastern horizon. Under the midday sun, we glimpsed the Titan of Bravos, that colossal statue that guarded the harbor, an immense figure straddling the channel, carved from dark stone. My breath caught at its size, dwarfing anything I had ever seen. Bravos spread beyond it, a maze of canals and tall, many-windowed buildings. Painted boats drifted, and 1,000 foreign scents wafted on the air: fish, spices, city smoke. Compared to the north's sparse expanse, it felt overwhelming. The silver heron passed under the Titan's shadow, its braziers unlit in daytime, but a sense of awe prickled my skin. Bravos was known for wealth, cunning, and an iron pride and independence that had defied Valyria in ages past. Perhaps that was why they were willing to aid us, or at least to treat with us. We moored at a busy dock, where Bravosi guards, clad in purple and gray livery, waited to inspect new arrivals. Our translator Gadden handled the formalities, presenting father's letters of introduction. Once the officials were satisfied, we debarked. I led my retinue onto the bustling quay, stepping foot on Essos for the first time. A Bravosi official wearing the insignia of a magister's house greeted us in passable common tongue. He introduced himself as Morano, an aide to Magister Lauren Massanero, the same Lauren who had visited White Harbor in the wake of the siege. It seemed Lauren had arranged for us to be escorted to a guest villa. Relieved, I followed Morano through winding streets that felt impossibly vibrant. Canal bridges arching over shimmering water, houses stacked high with balconies, exotic street performers twirling ribbons. Laughter and music melded with the clatter of wagons on cobblestones. Now and then I saw glimpses of gloom in narrow alleys or masked bravos leaning against walls with rapiers at their hips. Bravos was many things, but safe? Hardly. In time we reached a secluded villa with a small courtyard. Servants in Bravosi attire bowed us inside, offering spiced wine. Captain Weiler's men eyed them warily, unwilling to let their guard down. Morano explained that Magister Lauren would visit us soon for formal talks. He also cautioned us not to wander alone at night. I thanked him politely, though my mind churned with the newness of it all. Once we settled in, I paced the courtyard, anxious. The journey had been long, and now the real challenge began, forging connections. By nightfall, Magister Lauren himself arrived. I remembered him, thin, elegantly mustached, courteous but with a calculating gaze. He embraced me lightly in the Bravosi style, kissing the air by my cheeks. "Lady Branna Stark," he said in a lilting accent. "Welcome to Bravos. I trust your voyage was tolerable." I forced a polite smile, responding with the formal words Gadden had taught me. "Your city is magnificent, Magister. Thank you for hosting us." We moved to a sitting area in the courtyard where torches glowed and a fountain tinkled softly. Weiler stood nearby, alert. Lauren wasted little time on pleasantries. Once wine had been served, he leaned forward. "I have heard your father still recovers from the wounds of that monstrous dragon in the north. Our condolences for the suffering. We Bravosi know well the cost of defying Valyria's fire." "I appreciate your sympathy," I replied. "My father recovers slowly. But we fear that Valyria, or at least certain factions, have not abandoned their ambitions. We keep encountering infiltration teams in the north, some bearing twisted dragons. Our intelligence suggests a mage named Doratus leads a large splinter of the freehold known as the Circle of the Sixth Flame. We believe he may attempt another invasion or at least a campaign of terror." Lauren's expression turned grave. "Our own agents have heard of Doratus. He is rumored to be a prodigious sorcerer likely allied with certain archons in Volantis or Tyria. The details are murky. But we do know that Valyria remains splintered. Infighting is vicious. For now, no single faction has mustered a grand legion like the one that attacked you. Yet that is no comfort if smaller warlords dispatch their minions to sow chaos." "Precisely," I said. "We also suspect they're searching for some artifact in the north which they call the Casket of Living Flame. We have scant details, only references from captured sorcerers." He steepled his fingers, considering. "Interesting. Bravos has no record of such an artifact. But old Valyria was filled with hidden contrivances. Some might be rumor, others real." His sharp eyes flicked to me. "You wish for Bravos to join you in preventing another incursion, I presume?" I tried not to sound desperate. "We do. Our resources are limited and the north is still rebuilding. If your agents could help us track the movements of Doratus, warn us of any alliance with other warlords or houses in Westeros that might spare thousands of lives. And in return, we can share our knowledge of how to kill dragons and drakes. Our scorpion designs, ballista improvements, ways of repelling or wounding them. We will also remain open to trade benefits with Bravos." Lauren nodded, sipping his wine. "A fair start, though Bravos does not commit lightly to entanglements. We stand on a precarious stage. Even if we do not fear Valyrian conquest as we once did, we must maintain caution. Let me propose we assemble a larger council with certain key magisters and perhaps envoys from other free cities who also resent Valyria's shadow. If we form a united front, it may deter Doratus from launching a grand assault on any one of us. We can pool intelligence on his circle's activities. That sounded promising, though complicated. I'm willing to meet whomever it takes, I said. The North cannot do this alone. A small, satisfied smile curved Lauren's lips. Good. I shall send out discreet invitations. For now, please enjoy our hospitality. Be patient. Such negotiations are best handled softly with time to woo the right allies. I inclined my head, though I privately worried about how much time we truly had. Still, it was progress. If Lauren could gather other influential Bravosi or perhaps men from Pentos or Lys, maybe we could glean the extent of Doratus's resources. Over the following days, I found myself immersed in a world far from Winterfell. Lauren arranged for me to visit certain Bravosi wards to see the famed Purple Harbor where merchants haggled over spices and silks. Captain Wyler trailed me everywhere, uneasy in the thronging crowds. I tried to keep my bearing stately, remembering Father's lessons on how a Stark should carry themselves, stoic but not unfriendly, cautious but not timid. Now and then I glimpsed a scowl from locals who recognized me as a Westerosi, but most seemed indifferent or curious. Gadden helped me with small talk in Bravosi, though I was nowhere near fluent. In the evenings, Lauren introduced me to other magisters, careful sorts with perfumed beards or cunning eyes. They expressed polite interest in the North Scorpion technology, especially how we had killed multiple dragons. I explained, in broad terms, our methods: the use of ballistae loaded with specialized bolts, coordination to target wings, covering tips in certain irritants. I withheld certain details for caution's sake, but enough to entice them. They, in turn, spoke cryptically of Valyria's fractious politics, naming archons I had never heard of. I gleaned that Doratus was considered dangerous even among these circles, as he preached a return to pure Valyrian supremacy, a notion that alarmed the free cities, which had freed themselves from that empire long ago. About 10 days into my stay, Lauren approached me with a glimmer of excitement. I have secured an audience with a potential ally, a Lyseni prince who detests Valyria's meddling. He might be persuaded to share intelligence on the circle of the Sixth Flame. Would you meet him? I nodded. Of course. That evening, we convened in a grand marble hall near the Moon Pool, a serene body of water ringed by pillars. The Lyseni prince arrived by gondola, accompanied by 2 hulking bodyguards. He wore flamboyant silks in turquoise and gold, a flamboyance that clashed with my more somber, northern attire. Lauren introduced him as Prince Rodrios. We exchanged polite bows. Then he eyed me with curiosity. So you are the Stark who traveled so far. Word of your father's stand against Valyria has spread even to Lys. I offered a measured smile. We only defended our home. I hear Lys, too, has reason to fear Valyrian aggression. He made a languid gesture with a ringed hand. Lys has often paid tribute or made deals to keep the dragons away. But now, with the empire splintered, the arrangement is less certain. Some Lyseni fear that if the circle of the Sixth Flame gains dominance, we will once again face subjugation. So you might help us hamper them? I asked carefully. He gave an enigmatic smile. Perhaps. But Lys has interests to protect. We prefer to avoid open war, especially far from our shores. Still, I've heard rumors about Doratus. Some say he is harnessing a living flame from the heart of Valyria's old volcanoes, breeding abominations that surpass what your north has seen. If that is true, we all have cause to worry. My pulse quickened. We have encountered twisted drakes, but they were smaller, stunted, though still deadly. If Doratus perfects them, Prince Rodrios sipped his wine. Then, my dear lady, Westeros will not be the only realm to suffer. He paused, flicking a glance at Lauren. I am prepared to share certain intelligence for a price. My spies in Volantis claim that Doratus is forging alliances with houses in the Stormlands and possibly the Reach. Ambitious lords who want power beyond their local means. Your father might find that relevant. As for the abominations, I can confirm shipments of live eggs have left the Valyrian Peninsula heading west. Where they are ultimately destined, I cannot say for certain. Possibly Dragonstone or perhaps some hidden base in Westeros. The shipping logs were disguised, but my sources gleaned enough to suspect something dire. I clenched my fists, imagining more monstrous eggs scattered across Westeros. That is indeed dire. And your price? He smiled, revealing teeth stained by sweet wine. We Lyseni trade in secrets and pleasures. Perhaps a favorable trade agreement with House Stark for certain goods, textiles, dyes, medicinal plants only grown in Lys. We can talk details later. For now, consider this a sign of good faith. He handed me a small scroll sealed with a Lyseni crest. A summary of what my spies learned. Keep it discreet. If you find further information on these drakes or how to kill them, share it with me. We must keep ourselves armed with knowledge. I accepted the scroll, heart pounding. You have my thanks. A trade agreement seemed a small price if it helped the North. We parted with polite bows. As he glided away in his gondola, I whispered to Lauren, if what he says is true, we have bigger problems than infiltration squads. Lauren nodded gravely. We suspected the circle might push eggs out into the world, sowing chaos in multiple lands. Now we have partial confirmation. Bravos shall remain vigilant in these waters, but if those eggs have already reached Westeros, I fear you have a serpent in your cradle. That bleak image haunted me. Another wave of twisted hatchlings, no longer stunted by poor care, but carefully bred in hidden corners. Our scorpions could handle adult drakes in small numbers, but a widespread infestation? The cost would be unimaginable. Throughout the next week, I attended more gatherings, forging ties with smaller magisters, shipping consortium leaders, anyone with a stake in thwarting Valyrian expansion. My retinue grew restless, longing for the North's simpler ways, but they understood the necessity. My days filled with conversation and speculation, with swirling rumor about Daratus' recruiting spree. Some said he boasted that the North would be made an example, his revenge for our slaying of the High Magus. The Bravosi refused to commit to open war, but they indicated readiness to share intelligence and hamper Valyrian shipping as best they could. One night, after a draining round of negotiations, I returned to the villa to find Captain Wyler with a grim set to his jaw. My lady, we have trouble. One of our men was attacked in the street by a pair of cloaked figures who might have spoken Valyrian. He escaped, but they nearly abducted him. Alarm jolted me. He's alive. Bruised ribs, but yes. They seemed intent on dragging him into a narrow alley. He fought free. By the time reinforcements arrived, the assailants were gone. Dread prickled my skin. So the Circle has agents here. Or some Valyrian sympathizers. We had grown complacent, thinking Bravos was friendly. But the city was vast, with factions that might be bribed. My mind raced. We must be more cautious. Double the guard. I'll inform Lauren, though I doubt he can do much beyond cautioning the Bravosi watch. Wyler nodded, tension in his posture. I don't like it, my lady. The sooner we return to the North with what we've learned, the better. Agreed, I said. But first I must finalize these alliances. We can't leave abruptly and squander the progress we've made. Wyler grunted, though I knew he understood the stakes. Over the next days, we increased our security. I never walked alone, and we avoided side streets, traveling only by day in groups. Lauren expressed concern at the attack but offered little more than apologies, saying Bravos brimmed with hidden agendas. Indeed, the city's labyrinth of canals and alleys provided a perfect stage for clandestine violence. Yet I pressed on, determined to secure a firm statement of cooperation. Finally, Lauren convened a small but significant council in a private hall belonging to a consortium of Bravosi financiers. There, half a dozen notables gathered, magisters from Bravos, a representative from Pentos, a Lyseni envoy standing in for Prince Rodrios. We spoke for hours about the circle of the Sixth Flame, Valyrian ambitions, the risk to trade and stability in both Essos and Westeros. At the end, we drafted a discreet agreement. If Bravosi or Lyseni ships detected suspicious cargo that might be carrying draconic eggs to Westeros, they would share that intelligence promptly with White Harbor or King's Landing, whichever was closer. We also gained a promise that Bravos would watch for signs of a large-scale Valyrian fleet gathering. In return, I promised that once the North fully recovered, we would open new trade routes and supply them with our advanced Scorpion designs. It wasn't a military alliance, but it was a crucial step, a net of vigilance that might prevent a full surprise assault. Exhausted but relieved, I thanked Lauren personally. He bowed with a flourish. May our cooperation thwart the flames to come. Safe travels, Lady Branna. The next morning, we made ready to depart. Our Bravosi hosts arranged for a small escort gondola to take us to our ship, the Silver Heron, which we had reprovisioned. My men were more than eager to return home. I too yearned for the familiar walls of Winterfell, for father's presence, for Edric's laughter. Still, I carried a swirl of apprehension about what might have transpired in my absence. We boarded the Silver Heron with minimal fanfare, setting sail under cloudy skies. The Titan's colossal outline receded behind us, and soon we were back on the open sea. Though the crossing was swifter this time thanks to favorable winds, the tension remained. Our lookouts stood vigilant day and night, mindful of the possibility that Valyrian agents might intercept us. Once or twice we spotted distant sails, but none approached aggressively. Gradually the miles fell behind us. It was during one dusk watch that something shattered our uneasy calm. I stood at the stern, gazing at the horizon, when shouts erupted forward. Rushing to the bow, I saw a monstrous shape in the sky, a dark silhouette crossing the orange-gold remains of sunset. My blood turned to ice. Wings, broad and leathery. A dragon? Panic rippled among the crew, some crying out. Captain Wyler barked for the archers to ready bows. The shape grew clearer, a large flying creature indeed, but not quite the size of the war dragons we had fought at Winterfell. Its flight was wobbly, as though it were either injured or a less stable flyer. My heart hammered. Had a twisted drake followed us from Bravos? Or had it come from some hidden nest? As it neared, we heard a roar that crackled over the waves. I readied a crossbow, though hitting a flying target from a rolling ship would be sheer luck. The beast swooped lower, a gleaming, ridged silhouette. Then, with a thunderous flapping of wings, it dove toward the sea, spitting a gush of flame that hissed against the water, causing steam to billow up. The men shouted curses. Was it trying to intimidate us? Arrows flew, most missing wide. The drake soared overhead, trailing an acrid smell. Suddenly, it whirled around for another pass. A wave of scorching heat swept over the deck as it spewed fire. I ducked, half expecting a conflagration, but the flame only glanced across the sails, singing the canvas. The crew scrambled to douse it. We were lucky the drake's angle was off. If it found a direct shot, we could be burned to cinders in open water. Wyler cursed. We need the Scorpion, now. Yes, we had stowed a collapsible Scorpion below decks, but assembling it on a pitching ship would be no simple feat. The men rushed to drag its components onto the main deck. The drake wheeled in the darkening sky, letting out a shriek. My chest constricted. Could it sink us with repeated blasts of flame? We scrambled. 2 men hammered at the Scorpion's parts, cursing as the vessel rocked. Another loaded a heavy bolt with chain-linked attachments. I found myself repeating father's old instructions, aim for the wings, or if we get close, the underbelly. The drake soared overhead again, flame flickering at its jaws. Arrows peppered it, some glancing off, others embedding in its neck. It roared, thrashing midair. Blood rained down in droplets. That told me it wasn't fully grown or fully armored. Like many of these twisted creations, it was vulnerable in spots. But it remained lethal. The drake dove. We braced for another wave of flame. The entire forward deck lit with a harsh orange glow. I flinched away from the inferno, feeling my skin scald. Screams erupted as a man was engulfed, flailing. Then with a frenzied grunt, Wyler and another soldier heaved the Scorpion upright, swinging it to track the beast's path. I seized the release lever. The drake swooped lower. My stomach twisted, too high to ensure a shot, but we had to try. Hold, Wyler hissed. The drake banked, preparing to circle for a final, devastating pass. I saw an opening in its arc. Wyler yelled, now. I yanked the lever. The Scorpion bolt cut through the dusk with a resonant twang. For a moment I thought we'd missed. Then the drake screeched, wings stuttering. The bolt had pierced the membrane of its left wing, lodging near the shoulder. It flailed, losing altitude. My men shouted in grim triumph. But the beast wasn't finished. It spiraled downward, crashing into the ocean with a colossal splash near our bow. In the swirling waves it floundered, thrashing, spitting flame that sputtered on the water's surface. The ship lurched, nearly colliding with the wounded monster. Back oars! Avoid it, the captain of the Silver Heron bellowed. Sailors frantically maneuvered. The drake's head rose from the water, spewing a last, feeble burst of flame that singed the hull. Archers rained arrows. One lodged in its eye, another in its throat. With a final, agonized shriek, it sank beneath the churning waves, black blood spreading across the surface. We stood trembling, the deck reeking of smoke and salt. Several men lay injured, 2 dead from burns. The mainsail was scorched. But we remained afloat. My legs felt like water. Another twisted drake, here in mid-sea? Where had it come from? The question roiled my thoughts as I helped treat the wounded. Perhaps it was simply a rogue beast that had escaped from some Valyrian menagerie. Perhaps it had been released deliberately to harass ships traveling to or from Bravos. In any case, it confirmed that the Circle's monstrous creations were not confined to the north. Despite the damage, the Silver Heron pressed on. We made emergency repairs, hobbling forward under partial sail. I spent the next day in a haze, tending burns, calming frightened sailors, grateful beyond measure that we hadn't been sunk. Even with my experience fighting drakes on land, an aerial assault at sea was a new terror. At last, the coast of Westeros came into sight. Once we reached White Harbor, Lord Wylus Manderly received us with alarm upon seeing the scorched ship. We recounted the mid-sea attack, darkening his expression. If these creatures roam open waters, then we have reason to fear for our trade lanes as well, he said grimly. But you've returned, Lady Branna, and that alone is a boon. I trust your mission bore fruit. I handed him sealed letters, including the short treaties we had established and a summary of intelligence gleaned from lists. Lord Manderly scanned them, nodding with approval. At least we can prepare. I'll send word to Father at once. That same day, we rode for Winterfell, exhausted but determined. My heart yearned to see Father and Edric, to share what I had learned. The road felt achingly familiar after the wonders and terrors of Braavos. We spent only a few days traveling. Lord Manderly lent us fresh horses, and by sunset of the fourth day, I saw Winterfell's walls rising in the distance. Warm relief washed over me. Home, with all its burdens, was still where I belonged. We entered the courtyard amid the bustle of returning patrols. Edric hurried down from the ramparts to greet us. He embraced me fiercely, ignoring the dust on my cloak. Thank the gods you're back in one piece. Father will be overjoyed. Hurry, there's much to discuss. I dismounted, handing the reins to a stable boy, and accompanied Edric inside, with Captain Wyler and a few men trailing behind. The corridors felt oddly small after Braavos' grandeur. We reached Father's solar, where he sat in a high-backed chair, scars partially hidden by a thick cloak. He looked pale and thinner than before, but his eyes lit with gratitude when he saw me. Daughter, you've returned safely. Good. I came forward, kneeling briefly at his side to clasp his hand. Father, I bring news from across the sea. We had close calls, but we made alliances, or at least intelligence-sharing agreements, with Braavos and Lys. He nodded slowly. You've done well, I can see it in your eyes. Edric and I have tidings too. Some are dire. I rose, exchanging a look with Edric, whose face was tense. Father gestured for me to sit. Not long after you left, we uncovered evidence of more infiltration attempts, scattered cells apparently heading toward the area around the Bar Rollins. Our men, along with the Riswells, clashed with a few, capturing scrolls that again mentioned the Blablood. Edric can elaborate. My brother took over. It seems the Black Blood September might be in Westeros after all, located in or near the Bar Rollins. There are references to ancient tombs beneath the barrows. The infiltrators were searching old crypts, scribbling runes. Possibly they hope to unearth something. We suspect it might relate to the casket of living flame they want. There's talk of a subterranean chamber where the Watchers once performed rites. I let out a shaky breath, recalling the references from Thesantis' notes. So the Watchers in the ice might be connected to that area? The Bar Rollins are cold, but not truly icy. Unless it's metaphorical. Edric shrugged. We're uncertain. But House Riswell reported that they drove off a band of foreign mages who tried to set up camp in an ancient barrow. They found half-finished runes carved into the stone. The mages fled west, possibly to regroup. Father and I considered dispatching a force to scour every barrow, but that could take months. We need a more targeted approach. Father coughed softly, wincing at the pain. We also received word from the Boltons. A local wise woman claims knowledge of old songs about a site called the Black Blood September, hidden beneath a labyrinth of barrow tombs. She says it was sealed generations ago, from fear of some malignant presence. If the circle of the sixth flame aims to break that seal, the consequences could be dire. My mind spun, recalling how the mages believed they could harness or unlock powers. Perhaps that's their plan. Find this buried crypt, retrieve or awaken something that fuels their twisted sorcery or their lesser dragons. Another path to ensuring their dominion over the north. Father nodded gravely. We must stop them before they succeed. Our Watchers in the Bar Rollins can only do so much if they don't know precisely where to look. I fear we must mount an expedition of our own. Search systematically, question the local wise folk, see if we can locate this sealed September. I regarded Father's pained posture. You mean for Edric to lead it or me? He exhaled, eyes flicking between us. You both have proven your mettle. Edric is more practiced in martial leadership, but he also must coordinate the overall defense of the realm from Winterfell. If we send a large force into the Bar Rollins, We risk leaving other areas exposed. Branna, you have shown skill in unraveling mysteries. Perhaps you should head this expedition with a carefully chosen group of men. Edric can support you from afar, sending reinforcements if needed. I glanced at Edric, who nodded. I hate sending you into danger again, sister, but we can't let these crypts remain uninvestigated. If you're willing, you'll have a contingent of loyal soldiers, plus scouts who know the barrows. Time is of the essence. If these infiltration teams converge, they might succeed in opening the seal. My pulse quickened with both dread and resolve. I had just returned from Bravos. Now here was another mission, but it had to be done. I'll do it, I said. We'll find the sept, ensure it stays sealed, or destroy whatever power thereafter. Father's eyes were solemn. You are a credit to our house, daughter. May the old gods watch over you. No time to lose. I spent the night in frantic preparations, reviewing every scrap of information gleaned from captured scrolls. Maester Halley's advised that the Barrow Labyrinth was rumored to predate the first men, or at least stand from that distant era with runic wards placed by unknown keepers. He warned that meddling might awaken curses or worse. I shuddered at the parallels to Valyrian sorcery. The next morning, I gathered my chosen retinue, 50 men, including trackers, a few who had studied old runes, and Captain Weiler once again at my side. Edric arranged for supply wagons and horses, cautioning that the area around the barrows lacked robust farmland, so we should be self-sufficient. We left Winterfell under gray skies, Father's parting gaze following me from the gatehouse. My entire body thrummed with tension. The last few months felt like an unending chain of urgent quests, extinguishing fires near and far while the specter of Doratus loomed. But if the Circle believed their next step lay beneath our ancient tombs, perhaps we could sever that link before it bore fruit. We traveled south, then west, crossing familiar roads until the terrain flattened into the moody, windswept plains known as the Bar Rolands. The land was dotted with ancient burial mounds, earthen ridges, and half-crumbled cairns. Sparse grasses waved in the wind, giving an eerie hush to the environment. Now and then we saw flocks of black crows swirling overhead as if drawn by the promise of old bones. House Dustin, House Riswell, and other families kept watch in these parts, each controlling a portion of the plains. We planned to coordinate with them and glean whatever local lore might guide us to the sealed sept. At the seat of House Riswell, a dour castle known for its black ramparts, we conferred with Lord Burner Riswell. He was a stern, aging man who had personally clashed with a band of Valyrian infiltrators weeks before. His second son had been killed in that skirmish, fueling his hatred for these foreign devils, as he called them. Over a sparse meal, he related what they had discovered in an abandoned barrow, fresh carvings of odd symbols, half reminiscent of Valyrian glyphs but also echoing the swirl patterns found in ancient First Men sites. We destroyed those carvings, hoping to disrupt whatever ritual they intended, Lord Burner said. But we suspect they've moved on, searching for a bigger trove of runes. One rumor says they found a hidden door in a barrow to the west, though we never confirmed it. I studied a rough map on the table. The barrows spread across miles, many uncharted. We need a starting point, I said. If these glyphs are part of a larger puzzle, we might look for barrows known to have runic stones inside. Burner nodded. There is an old tale among my people about the Great Barrow that leads to a labyrinth of many chambers sealed by blood and bone. Some say it's haunted, others that it's cursed. I always dismissed it as local superstition, but now he spread his hands. Captain Weiler traced the map. Where's this Great Barrow? Burner tapped a spot near the southwestern portion of the plains. We can guide you there. It's 2 days' ride. We seldom approach it ourselves. Shepherds avoid the entire region. No one builds near it. So we had our lead. That night we lodged at Riswell's castle. I found sleep elusive, imagining what lay beneath that mound. But at dawn we rode out under Burner's guidance. He brought 20 of his men as well, determined to avenge his son if the Valyrian marauders lurked there. The wind howled across the plains, flattening the grass and rattling the skeletons of old shrubs. Crows took flight at our approach, cawing in dissonant chorus. On the second afternoon, the silhouette of a massive mound rose ahead, easily 3 times the height of any typical barrow, a hulking shape that overshadowed the land around it. The grass on its slopes looked withered, brittle. My stomach tightened. Even from afar, the place exuded an oppressive hush. As we neared, the men grew quieter. One muttered that the wind itself sounded different here, carrying faint whispers. We dismounted at the base of the mound. Rocks jutted from the lower slope, forming a kind of partial ring. Lord Burner dismounted beside me, warily scanning the perimeter. If the legends hold any truth, there's an entrance on the far side, supposedly sealed with huge stone blocks. We crept around the mount's circumference, leaving a squad to guard our horses. The wind whipped at our cloaks. At last, we came upon a cluster of stone megaliths leaning against each other, half buried in the earthen slope. Faint carvings covered their surfaces, spirals, lines, shapes that might have once been glyphs. A narrow gap opened between two of the stones, wide enough for a person to slip through if they crouched. The earth around it showed signs of disturbance, fresh footprints, scraps of cloth, even a half-burned torch lying in the dust. My pulse lurched. The Valyrian infiltrators had indeed been here. We readied weapons and torches. A handful of men with shields stepped forward first. Then I, Burner, and Captain Weiler followed, with the rest behind us. The passage proved cramped at first, forcing us to stoop. Our torchlight flickered off damp stone walls etched with ancient marks. A sense of deep foreboding settled on me, as if we were trespassing in a realm the living were never meant to tread. The corridor slanted downward, leading into a chill, musty gloom. Now and then we saw side chambers, small burial alcoves with scattered bones. Some had been disturbed recently. My stomach twisted at the sight of upturned skulls and broken grave goods. The air smelled stale, tinged with rot. Step by step we advanced, the flicker of torches carving dancing shadows on the walls. Before long we reached a fork. One passage continued straight, another branched left. We paused, uncertain. Then a soldier spotted faint footprints in the dust leading left. So left we went, pushing deeper. At times we glimpsed more runic carvings on the walls. Though the style was foreign, neither purely Valyrian nor purely First Men. Some patterns reminded me of the swirling designs linked to the Children of the Forest, but twisted, as if fused with something else. My nerves prickled, imagining the circle's ritual. Did they plan to break some ward or open a sealed chamber to find that casket of living flame? In hushed silence, we pressed on, until the corridor opened into a large chamber. Our torchlight revealed rows of carved pillars, each shaped like an elongated figure robed in swirling patterns. The ceiling arched overhead, nearly lost in the gloom. And at the far side of the chamber, a massive stone door stood set into the wall, ringed by glyphs. My heart thumped. This had to be the main seal. But we were not alone. Across the chamber, half hidden in shadows, figures moved. Cloaked men, at least a dozen. At the center, a tall shape in black robes stood before the stone door, chanting in a low, resonant voice. The moment our torches flared into view, the chanting stopped. The robed figure turned sharply, revealing a pale, angular face, eyes gleaming gold in the torchlight. A hush of dreadful recognition passed over our group. I felt my breath catch. Another Valyrian sorcerer. We had encountered the Santis before, but this man's presence radiated an even darker aura. Then I spotted more. Behind them crouched two drakes, smaller than the war beasts but larger than the stunted ones we had faced. Their scales gleamed a sickly greenish hue. My stomach lurched. A cold, high voice cut the silence. You dare trespass on sacred ground? How typical of the Starks to meddle in powers beyond them. The robed man stepped forward, and I glimpsed a twisted staff in his hand. Bow to the circle of the sixth flame. I am Vorith, disciple of Doratus. This place is ours now. My nerves sang with alarm. Captain Weiler raised his sword, shouting for archers to form up. Lord Burner uttered a furious oath. I forced strength into my voice. You have no right to defile this tomb, nor any land in the north. Surrender, or we will destroy you. Vorith's lips curled in a sneer. You think we fear you? The seal is almost broken. Once the black blood is awakened, your entire realm will burn. He gestured to the men behind him who formed a defensive line. The two drakes hissed, flames licking around their jaws. I glanced around swiftly, counting perhaps 15 foes, plus the sorcerer and the drakes. We had about 70 men, but the corridor behind us was narrow. Only a portion could engage at once. And these drakes could unleash deadly bursts of fire in an enclosed space. The risk of chaos was high, but we could not let them complete their ritual. Captain Weiler acted first, barking orders. Archers lined up in the corridor's mouth, launching arrows into the chamber. The Valyrian men scattered, returning fire with crossbows or incantations. One projectile flew overhead, sizzling with eerie green flame that splashed onto a shield, burning it. Our men cried out, dropping the shield. The drakes roared, bounding forward. A swirl of flame erupted, forcing us to duck. Torchlight flickered wildly as the fight began in earnest. Spearmen surged in, trying to fan out on the chamber floor. Vorith raised his staff, chanting a piercing phrase. The air shimmered around him, forming a flickering barrier that deflected arrows. My mind raced, like the spells we had seen with the High Magus at Winterfell. We needed to disrupt his concentration. Lord Burner roared, leading a flank of Ryswell men around a pillar. They clashed with the Valyrian soldiers in brutal melee. Swords rang off steel, men shouted in pain. One drake spat fire at the flank, sending a wave of scorching heat. The pillars deflected some flame, but men caught at the edges howled in agony. I pressed forward with Captain Wyler. We circled wide, aiming to reach the drake's flank. Our archers sought vantage among the pillars, loosing arrows whenever the beasts reared their heads. Blood spattered the stone floor, the stench of charred flesh thick in the air. Vorith advanced, staff crackling with unnatural light. He hurled a bolt of greenish fire at a cluster of our men, who scattered. I realized with horror that if we didn't neutralize him soon, he could decimate us with sorcery. Focus on the drakes first, I shouted, recalling Father's tactic. Kill the beasts, deny the sorcerer that advantage. Captain Wyler and a scorpion team carried a collapsible bow, a smaller version than the full scorpion but potent enough. They scrambled to set it up behind a pillar, fighting the echoing chaos of the chamber. Meanwhile, the drakes roamed, snapping at men who tried to flank them. One soldier thrust a spear at a drake's belly, only to have the creature bat him aside with savage force, flame spewing from its maw. The soldier collapsed, ablaze. Heart pounding, I seized a crossbow from a fallen comrade, aimed at the drake, and fired. The bolt struck its flank, glancing off scales. Not enough. The beast roared. Another volley of arrows from our archers pelted its side. Blood trickled where an arrow found a gap, but it still stood. The second drake lunged at Lord Burner, who hacked at its jaw with a battle-axe. Sparks flew. The creature recoiled, flame sputtering. More Ryswell men closed in, stabbing. For a moment it seemed they might overpower it. Then Vorith barked an incantation, unleashing a wave of force that knocked them back. The drake seized the moment, exhaling flame and searing two men into ash. Burner fell, cloak smoldering. He struggled to rise, cursing. We needed that scorpion set up now. Captain Wyler's team finally had the device upright. I sprinted over to help load the bolt. The first drake spotted us, turning, jaws dripping flame. My blood froze. If it spat now, we'd be incinerated. But an arrow from behind struck its eye. The beast shrieked in fury, stumbling. That split second was enough for Wyler to yank the trigger cord. The scorpion bolt lanced across the chamber and punched into the drake's chest. A wet, sickening impact. The beast collapsed with a gurgling roar, thrashing. We had one down. Vorith howled in fury. He flung a swirl of green flame at the scorpion, turning it to slag in an instant. Our men scrambled back from the molten metal. Furious tears stung my eyes. The second drake still lived and we had lost our best weapon. But we had no time to lament. Vorith advanced on us, staff glowing with infernal light. I raised my sword in trembling defiance, even knowing how outmatched we were in direct melee with a sorcerer. Yet I had no choice. Suddenly a figure barreled out from behind a pillar, Lord Burner, ragged and wounded but alive. He crashed into Vorith, staggering the sorcerer mid-chant. The green glow flickered. Burner swung his axe at the staff. Vorith narrowly parried, the staff clashing with steel in a burst of sparks. You killed my son. Burner bellowed. Vorith hissed, forcing him back with a surge of unnatural strength. The staff's tip flared, blasting Burner in the chest. He flew backward, slamming into a pillar, sliding down in a motionless heap. In that heartbeat, I lunged. My sword swept at Vorith's side, but he turned, half dodging. The blade scored a shallow cut on his robes. His eyes bored into me. Stark, he spat. I should have known you would come. He thrust his free hand at me, a swirl of raw heat forming. I braced, half expecting to be burned alive. but Captain Weiler tackled him from behind, spoiling the spell. They struggled, smashing into a pillar. Vorith elbowed Weiler in the face, sending him sprawling. I aimed a desperate slash at Voritha's arm. He jerked back, though the tip scored flesh. He cursed, staff weaving in a defensive pattern. The scowl on his face twisted with hatred. Then he barked a command in Valyrian, and the second drake, still rampaging, turned its gaze our way. My heart seized. If it bathed us in flame, we were done. A flurry of movement from the side, our archers unleashed a volley at the drake's head. The beast roared, snapping at the arrows. Another soldier hurled a spear that struck its flank. It twisted in agony, sending a wash of flame that set pillars ablaze. The chamber filled with thick smoke. Men choked, stumbling. Vorith sneered, stepping away from me, presumably to rally his men. But Captain Weiler, blood streaming from his temple, lunged and seized the sorcerer's staff with both hands, yanking it. Vorith lost his grip for a moment, howling. The staff spun away, clattering on the ground. I rushed to grab it. Searing pain flared in my hand the instant I touched the staff. It radiated pulses of unholy heat. Still, I clung, ignoring the agony. Vorith lunged for me, but Weiler tackled him again, and they tumbled across the floor in a tangle of limbs. For half a second, I stared at the staff, feeling a nauseating swirl of magic. Perhaps it was an extension of Voritha's power, key to his blood. I wanted to snap it over my knee, but the energy surging within it might explode. Instead, I flung it across the chamber into a corner. Vorith screeched in rage. At that moment, the second drake took a crossbow bolt to the throat, courtesy of one of our men perched on a fallen pillar. A gout of black blood erupted. The beast's flame sputtered out. Wounded severely, it thrashed. Another arrow from our archers lodged in its eye. With a last hideous moan, the drake collapsed in a steaming heap. Relief spiked through me. Both drakes down. Smoke billowed, corpses littered the floor, some still aflame. The surviving Valyrian soldiers, seeing their beasts dead, began to falter. Many tried to flee through side passages. Our men gave chase, cutting them down or capturing them. Captain Weiler pinned Vorith, who still struggled and spat curses. At last, Weiler slammed the pommel of his sword against Voritha's temple. The sorcerer slumped unconscious. A hush descended, broken only by pained groans and the crackle of small fires. I coughed, tears streaming from the smoke. We had one. The ritual was halted, no sign that the door had been fully opened. But the cost was high. I rushed to Lord Burner. He lay crumpled, blood seeping from his mouth. I knelt, pressing a hand to his chest. He gave a faint gasp, eyes fluttering open. Did we stop them? He rasped. Yes, I whispered. The drakes are dead. Vorith is captured. A shadow of relief crossed his battered features. He tried to speak again, but only blood bubbled from his lips. Then his eyes glazed and he went limp. I swallowed hard, trembling. Another life taken by this cursed conflict. He died avenging his son. We soon discovered that the stone door had indeed been partially opened. A crack gaped near the base, wide enough to reveal a swirl of glyphs on the other side. If Vorith had been given more time, he might have completed the incantation to break the seal. The men eyed it uneasily, fearful that some terror lay beyond. I peered at the crack, seeing a faint red glow emanating from within, as though embers smoldered. My skin prickled. Was that the so-called black blood, or some hidden flame? Captain Weiler joined me, wiping sweat and soot from his face. Should we leave it sealed, my lady? I nodded firmly. Yes. But first, we must ensure no one can reopen it. They chipped away at the stone. We'll rebuild the barrier, pile rubble, do whatever it takes to bury this chamber forever. We can't risk leaving it half undone. He grimaced. Agreed. Before we began, I knelt by Voritha's unconscious form, searching his robes. He had scrolls tucked within, covered in runes, plus a small iron box that rattled with glass vials. Possibly alchemical potions. We took it all. The staff lay in a corner, flickering with residual energy. I didn't want to touch it, but we couldn't leave it behind. With a length of cloth, we wrapped it carefully, removing it from Voritha's immediate reach. Then our men set about demolishing any sign of the ritual, scouring the runes from the door, piling stone fragments to wedge it shut. It was brutal, sweaty work, especially with the smoke and stench of death. We lost track of time. At last, with the chamber choked by rubble and the stone door fully blocked, we retreated. Bodies had to be dragged out, ours and theirs. Many of the Valyrians were dead. A few, wounded, were taken captive. We emerged into the open air, blinking at the late afternoon sun. The wind seemed fresh, cleansing away the tomb's foulness. Exhausted, we camped at a safe distance from the barrow. That night, I could hardly sleep, haunted by the memory of that glowing crack in the sealed door. Could something remain stirring within? At least now it was blocked again. Even if the circle tried to unearth it, they would face a collapsed passage. Perhaps we had thwarted them. Yet I recalled Doratus was still at large in Essos, presumably forging grander plans. This was only one piece of the puzzle, albeit a crucial one. In the morning we honored our fallen, burning their bodies on pyres with solemn words. Lord Burner's remains would be taken back to House Riswell for proper rites. Then we made the trek home, battered and weary, with Vorith bound in chains and the battered staff wrapped in cloth. Once more we had defied the circle of the sixth flame. But the War of Shadows raged on. Upon returning to Winterfell, Father and Edric awaited us in the courtyard, flanked by worried onlookers. They saw the grim expressions and wounded men. I recounted what had transpired. Father's face clouded with sorrow at Burner's death, but he praised our victory. Then his gaze fell upon Vorith, who had been hauled from a cart, barely conscious. Us battered? Another sorcerer in our dungeons, Father murmured. If this one shares the same fanaticism, we may learn little. Edric eyed the staff. That cursed object, we must handle it with care. Perhaps Halleys can find a way to strip it of its powers. I nodded. We can't let it fall into any Valyrian hands. It brims with vile magic. Father wearily gestured for the guards to take Vorith to a separate cell from Thesantis. We'll keep them apart. The last thing we need is them conspiring or unleashing combined spells. Maester Halleys approached with alarm. So they nearly broke the seal to this blood crypt. Old records mention some intangible power there, possibly a leftover from the dawn of days. We have no clue how it might feed their twisted dragons or empower their sorcery. I exhaled, suddenly bone-tired. At least we prevented it. For now. The partial success felt overshadowed by the knowledge that these threats kept multiplying. Father beckoned me closer. He was standing, but I could tell he leaned on a cane hidden beneath his cloak. In a low voice he said, "You've done more than I could have hoped, Branna. I see how it weighs on you. But remain steadfast a bit longer. The realm still needs us." I squeezed his hand, tears burning my eyes. "I'll do my duty, Father. Always." Thus we entered another phase of vigilance at Winterfell. We had Vorith and Thesantis both in custody, plus some lesser captives. We had new artifacts, Vorith's staff and scrolls, that might shed further light on the Circle's plans. We had alliances with Bravos and Lys offering partial intelligence from Essos. And we had the uneasy sense that time was short. If Doratus was sending more twisted eggs across the sea, we might soon face not infiltration squads, but a tide of monstrous hatchlings under local conspirators. The days turned into weeks as we recovered from the Barrow battle. Edric took charge of distributing new Scorpion designs to all major northern strongholds. Father presided over a war council in the Great Hall, calling the lords to unify once more. I spent countless hours with Maester Halleys, translating Vorith's scrolls, gleaning references to breeding experiments and mention of the Great Incubator in some hidden fortress in Essos. The staff, too, contained runic channels that tapped into draconic essence. Halleys theorized it allowed Vorith to focus a drake's energy for conjurations. Terrifying knowledge. Occasionally we tried questioning Vorith, but he clung to fanatical silence or threats. The only slip he made was a hiss about Doratus preparing the final forging, which we interpreted as a reference to perfecting new drakes or harnessing some old magic. The fear that a second large-scale invasion might come weighed on us all. Yet for the moment, the north was quiet. No fresh sightings of twisted dragons soared overhead, no infiltration groups were reported. Our watchers patrolled the coasts, the Neck, the Barrow Mounds. White Harbor remained on alert for suspicious ships. Bravos continued to send coded notes, stating that Doratus had not yet consolidated enough power to mount a grand assault. But they warned us to remain vigilant. Tension settled like a drawn bow waiting to release. In that uneasy lull, Father's health improved enough for him to walk short distances without support. Edric busied himself with training new recruits. I found myself in Father's solar one late afternoon, standing by the window. The sky glowed orange with sunset, reminding me of the day I had gazed over the same horizon before the siege. Back then, I never dreamed how deeply Valyria's shadow would seep into our lands. But here we were, battered but unbroken. Father stepped beside me, setting a scarred hand on the windowsill. "Are you thinking of the battles behind us or the battles yet to come?" he asked softly. A wry smile tugged my lips. "Both, I suppose. We have triumphed time and again, and still I fear the next threat." He nodded. "That is the burden of leadership. But never forget, Branna, our people endure. We have you, Edric, all of us forging a shield that no empire can break easily." I glanced at him, love and respect swelling in my chest. I learned from the best. And we learned from bitter experience that no measure of vigilance is wasted. He sighed, gazing over the courtyard where ravens perched. True enough. Let us remain watchful but also find moments to live. Life cannot be all war. I bowed my head, touched by his words, yet uncertain whether peace would ever truly take root so long as Valyria's mages sought to raise draconic abominations. Even so, a faint flutter of hope stirred. We had alliances now, knowledge, and the memory of how the North had once driven out even the mightiest legion. If Doratus came, we would rise again. The sun slipped below the horizon, painting the sky with red embers as though reflecting the lingering threat of fire. In my heart, I carried the vow that we Starks would face that flame unflinching, forging our resolve anew in every trial. For the North remembered. The North endured. And if Valyria, in any shape, declared war once more, we would stand with swords and scorpions at the ready, defending our land to the last breath of winter's chill.